Kimberly is the most indulgent and radiant red rose. She is exceptionally beautiful, with eyes that can easily captivate men with just a glance. It's said that the men who have fallen for her could line up from the second ring road to the fifth ring road, yet a mess. Kimberly can't even be bothered to lift an eyelid, until her best friend made a bet with her. Kimberly, if you can win over my Uncle Felix, you can pick any of the treasures in my garage. Felix, the helmsman of the Francis family consortium, is aloof, restrained, noble, and arrogant, a lofty, unattainable flower in the hearts of countless socialites and ladies. Rumor has it that not even a female mosquito can get close to him, but Kimberly smiled. What she wanted, she had never failed to obtain. However, plans can never keep up with changes. On the very first day the bet was made, she encountered Felix, who had been drugged, already intending to get close to him. Kimberly unexpectedly became his antidote. After that night, Felix, the perennial iceberg, seemed to have been cracked open by her. For 3 years, Felix seemed addicted, against the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, in the bathroom of his private jet, even in the locker room of the golf course. They explored every position, entangled in passion in all sorts of places. Kimberly's heart also sank little by little amidst these countless intimate unions. She thought that this man, revered like a god, belonged to her too, until tonight, after their intimacy in the car, she noticed his sapphire cufflink had fallen off. She picked it up, intending to return it to him. The door of the private room at the end of the corridor was slightly ajar. Just as she was about to push it open, she heard the sound of conversation and laughter coming from inside. Felix, just came down from the land of tenderness, haven't you? That girl Kimberly, usually as spoiled and unruly as a little wildcat, doesn't take anyone seriously, but when she's in front of you, she becomes so sweet and charming, it makes my heart itch just watching. When are you planning to marry her and bring her home? Kimberly paused in her steps, her heart inexplicably tightening. Then, she heard that familiar, bone-chillingly cold voice. Just a bed partner. Why marry her? 7 words, light as a feather, yet like 7 ice-cold daggers. Precisely stabbed into Kimberly's heart, instantly turning it into a bloody mess. The private room fell into an eerie silence. Clearly, even his brothers were stunned by this blunt and cruel definition. After who knows how long, someone cautiously broke the silence. No way, Han Ji, it's been 3 years. You still have that white moonlight in your heart. White moonlight. Kimberly, her mind went blank with a buzzing sound. Felix has a white moonlight. Like a puppet whose soul had been drained, she stood blankly outside the door, listening as Felix gave a faint in response. Back when we broke up, she said to give her 3 years, she'd try being with others, and I should try too. If we still liked each other, we'd get back together. She loves to make a fuss and feels insecure, so I do as she wishes. 3 years, I've tried everything. He paused, his voice carrying a faint but unmistakable trace of anticipation. It's time for her to come back. Kimberly felt as if struck by lightning, her entire body turning cold, her fingertips trembling uncontrollably. All those 3 years of intimacy, countless moments she thought were heartfelt connections, turned out to be nothing but his experiment in trying out someone else. Then what about Kimberly, with her temperament, spoiled and explosive like a little firecracker? If she finds out, bang, before the words had fully left her mouth. The heavy door of the private room was Kimberly violently pushed open. Everyone inside was startled, turning their heads in unison to look at the doorway. Kimberly stood right there, her face frighteningly pale, with only those peach blossom eyes of hers, red as if about to bleed. She didn't look at anyone, her gaze firmly fixed on the man sitting in the main seat. Felix wore that crisp suit, his back straight, his posture composed. He showed no trace of surprise or panic at her sudden appearance, remaining as cool and unflappable as ever. But it was precisely this calmness that felt like the final handful of salt rubbed into Kimberly's bleeding heart, because if he had even a little affection for her, he couldn't possibly have reacted this way. She walked up to him, gazing at the face she had loved for 3 years, her voice hoarse. Felix, don't you have anything to say to me? Felix looked up, calmly watching her. There's nothing to say, it's exactly what you heard. We're just bed partners. I always thought you understood that clearly. Jane made a bet with you. If you can win me over, you can pick any luxury car from her garage, and if luxury cars aren't enough for you, his slender fingers retrieved a black bank card from his suit's inner pocket, gently sliding it onto the coffee table in front of Kimberly. Here's 100 million. Consider it compensation for these 3 years of being at your beck and call. From now on, our relationship is completely over. After saying this, he stood up and prepared to leave, but the moment he passed by her, Kimberly suddenly reached out and tightly grabbed his wrist. Her hand was ice cold, gripping so hard that her knuckles turned white. Felix paused in his tracks. Then, he heard her, a person so proud, now as if using all her strength, clutching onto him like a piece of driftwood. word by word, her voice shattered, yet clearly striking the silent compartment. "But, I'm moved. Felix, I'm falling for you." She didn't know when she had lost that heart. Perhaps it was because she was too lazy to wear shoes in winter. He half crouched down, his warm hand gripping her cold ankle as he slipped the slippers on for her. Perhaps it was when she woke up from her appendicitis surgery, dazed and in pain, and the first thing she saw was him keeping vigil by her bedside, with faint shadows under his eyes. Perhaps it was in countless late nights, when he returned from social engagements with a slight tipsy scent of alcohol, yet still remembered she was afraid of thunder, and held her in his arms. Bit by bit, the small and ordinary things converged into a raging tide, completely overwhelming her. But now, he casually told her that she was just a bed partner. "Felix, how cruel you are." Felix, his thin lips parted slightly as he was about to speak, but the next second, his phone rang. He took it out, the screen lit up, and a preview of a new message suddenly caught Kimberly's eye. "Felix, it's been 3 years, I tried, but I still only like you. Let's get back together." In that instant, Kimberly felt her world completely collapse. Felix's gaze lingered on the screen for a moment, then, bit by bit, he pried open Kimberly's fingers that were tightly gripping him. "Sorry," he said, "I'm not interested." With that, he turned and strode away without a trace of hesitation. He said he never felt a thing. So, for these 3 years, she was the only one who, like a fool, had poured all her genuine emotions into this play he directed. Kimberly stood frozen in place, staring at her empty hand. The lingering warmth from his wrist still clung to her skin, now searing her like a branding iron. The next second, she suddenly grabbed the expensive imported liquor from the coffee table and smashed it violently onto the floor. Everything in sight, glasses, fruit plates, decorations, anything that could be broken became a sacrifice to her vented pain. Everyone in the private room was stunned. No one dared to step forward and stop her. After who knows how long, Kimberly finally exhausted herself, her eyes hollow, her face streaked with tears, yet she continued to laugh softly. She didn't know how she managed to walk out of the club. The night wind blew, chilling her tear-streaked face. She wiped her tears haphazardly and hailed a taxi. Follow that Maybach in front. She was going to see with her own eyes who that white moonlight was, the one he had been thinking about for 3 years. The one even she couldn't compare to. The driver noticed her unusual state but didn't dare ask more, stepping on the accelerator to follow. Felix, who had always been calm and steady while driving, was now clearly speeding up. Was he, that eager to see his beloved white moonlight? The car eventually stopped at the arrivals level of the international airport. Kimberly paid the fare, stumbled out of the car, and hid behind a pillar. She saw Felix standing at the exit, and then a woman in a white dress, with a gentle and delicate demeanor, walked out pulling a suitcase. When she saw that woman's face, Kimberly was thunderstruck. Not only because Felix opened his arms and steadily caught the woman when she rushed over, but also because he lowered his head and kissed her hair, his movements so tender they could drip with sweetness, and even more so, the white moonlight he so cherished and held in his arms, was actually Grace. That woman who was her nominal sister, the person she despised the most in this life and never wanted to be associated with. Back then, less than half a year after her mother died in a car accident, her father brought a woman home. That woman also brought along a daughter who was 3 years older than her. Grace. Father explained that the woman was his first love. Grace was his own flesh and blood, and if her mother hadn't taken him by force back then, he wouldn't have let his first love break up with him while pregnant. How utterly absurd. Kimberly knew the truth better than anyone. Back when father urgently needed funds to start his business and was at his wit's end, even struggling to put food on the table, he was the one who took the initiative to approach mother, who had been pursuing him for a long time and promised to marry her if her family would inject capital. His mother gave him her money, gave him all her love, and even later, in a car accident, gave her life to push him out of the way. And what happened, before his mother's body was even cold? His father turned around and used her dowry and inheritance as a betrothal gift to marry that so-called first love in a grand, glorious ceremony. Felix, he could have liked anyone. Why did it have to be Grace? Kimberly clenched her teeth so hard on her lower lip that she tasted blood without even realizing it. In a daze, Felix had already taken Grace's luggage, wrapped his arm around her waist, and walked toward the parking lot. Kimberly was as if possessed, hailing another car and continuing to follow them. Because she was following closely, she could clearly see through the car window that in the vehicle ahead, Felix turned his head and spoke gently to Grace, even reaching out to naturally tidy the stray hairs by Grace's ear. That kind of meticulous tenderness was something she had never received in the 3 years she had been with him. Her heart felt as if it were being ground on a millstone, over and over. The pain so intense she could barely breathe. Just as she stared fixedly ahead, her vision blurred by tears, a sudden change occurred at the intersection ahead. A series of screeching brakes and crashing sounds rang out one after another. Kimberly's taxi unexpectedly rear-ended the car in front, and was then violently hit by the car behind. Bang! A tremendous impact struck. Kimberly felt her forehead slam hard against the back of the front seat. A sharp pain shot through her, and warm liquid instantly trickled down, blurring her vision. Amidst the chaos and screams, through the shattered car window, she saw the door of the familiar Maybach ahead swing open. Felix was the first to get out. He quickly walked around to the passenger side and carefully lifted Grace out from inside. Felix held her, checking her injuries, his brow furrowed tightly, his face full of distress. Holding Grace in his arms, he turned to leave the accident scene. But his steps inadvertently met the gaze of Kimberly, who was trapped in the mangled back seat of the taxi, covered in blood and flesh. Kimberly saw a flicker of clear astonishment in his always calm eyes, but it vanished in an instant. The Grace in his arms seemed to sense his pause and spoke softly. "Felix, what's wrong? Did you see someone you know?" "I'm fine, just a few scratches. If there's someone you know, you should go check on them. I heard a taxi was badly wrecked." After a few seconds of silence, Felix averted his gaze. No acquaintances, all unrelated people. After saying this, he held Grace and strode away from the chaotic accident scene without looking back. Kimberly watched his resolute retreating figure, wanting to laugh, but tears mixed with blood streamed down. Unrelated people. So for the past 3 years, in his heart, she had always been just an unrelated person. When she woke up again, she was in the hospital. The nurse was adjusting the 4 on the back of her hand. Seeing her wake up, the nurse said, "Ms. Kimberly, you're finally awake. Your injuries are quite serious, so you'll need to stay in the hospital for observation. We also need to contact a family member to pay the medical expenses." Kimberly stared blankly at the ceiling, showing no reaction. The nurse repeated, "Ms. Kimberly, I've paid the medical bills." A deep, familiar male voice that made her heart twitch sounded from the doorway. Kimberly suddenly turned her head and saw Felix standing at the door of the hospital room, tall and elegant in a black suit. Seeing this, the nurse tactfully left the room. Felix walked in, his gaze sweeping over her bandaged wound, then reached out as if wanting to touch her forehead. Kimberly turned her head away to avoid him. "Mr. Felix, you're busy with countless affairs every day. Why bother looking after someone unrelated?" Upon hearing this, Felix paused his movements. "If I don't come, who else would come for you?" That one sentence, like the sharpest blade, precisely struck Kimberly's deepest pain point. Yes, who else did she have? Mother passed away early, father was biased, stepmother was hypocritical, that home was no longer her home. She could only disguise herself with arrogance and rebellion, pretending she didn't need anyone and didn't care about anything. Over these 3 years, it was him, Felix, who appeared time and again when she needed him, making her accustomed to dependence, making her mistakenly believe she had found a harbor. But now, the one who pushed her back into the abyss with his own hands was also him. Kimberly's heart ached to the point of numbness. "Even if no one comes, it's none of your business. You're the one who said we're over, Mr. Felix. I'm not that pathetic. You said you don't like me, and I'm not going to shamelessly cling to you." She took a deep breath, struggling to maintain her last shred of pride, and lashed out recklessly. "You don't actually think I was serious when I said I had feelings for you, do you? I was just saying that casually. You treated me like a bed partner, and I just treated you like a vibrator anyway. Your skills are just average. Once I'm better, I'll naturally find a better, younger vibrator." Felix looked at her feigned fierceness and red-rimmed eyes, his brow furrowing almost imperceptibly. At that moment, a nurse hurriedly pushed the door open. "Mr. Felix, Miss Grace has finished her examination and has been looking for you." Kimberly immediately reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, snapping, "Go keep your white moonlight company. I don't need you here." Felix looked at her in silence for a few seconds before finally speaking, his tone distant. "I'm here to keep you company, but not for any other reason. You're Jane's best friend. She asked me to look after you." Kimberly couldn't hold back any longer and burst out laughing. She laughed so hard her whole body trembled, tugging at her wounds with waves of pain, yet it couldn't compare to even a fraction of the ache in her heart. "Felix, don't worry." She stopped laughing, lifting her tear-streaked face, her eyes cold and shattered. "I'm not that self-absorbed." Felix felt a slight tremor in his chest, and a faint, fleeting emotion seemed to pass through his deep eyes, too quick to grasp. This was the first time he had ever seen Kimberly shed tears. Even when he had been rough with her in bed, she would only have reddened eyes and stubbornly bite her lip, never letting her tears fall easily. Now, seeing the clear tear stains on her face, his frown deepened slightly, his Adam's apple moved as if he wanted to say something, but in the end, he said nothing and turned to follow the nurse out of the hospital room. Watching his resolute retreating figure, Kimberly could no longer hold on and collapsed weakly onto the hospital bed. letting her tears silently soak the pillow. She thought she would cry for a long time, but strangely, her tears dried up quickly. All that remained was a deathly, icy silence. In the days that followed, she stayed in the hospital alone, taking care of herself. Changing the bandages was so painful it sent cold sweat streaming down her face, and eating felt like chewing on wax. Occasionally, she would overhear the nurses whispering in the hallway about how fortunate the young lady in the VIP room next door, Grace, was. Mr. Felix was so incredibly attentive, personally feeding her, giving her water, staying overnight to watch over her. It was as if he was afraid she would melt if held in the palm of his hand. Once, as she passed by that ward, through the slightly ajar door, she saw Felix sitting by the bed, peeling an apple, while Grace leaned on his shoulder, smiling tenderly. That scene, like a red-hot iron nail, was brutally hammered into her pupils, hurting so much that her vision went dark, her heart convulsing with waves of spasmodic pain. But she didn't cry. Her Kimberly greatest strength was loving fully and letting go gracefully. From now on, she would not shed a single tear for Felix. After being discharged from the hospital, the first thing she did was apply for a visa. She didn't want to stay in this city for another moment. After finishing her visa application and returning home, she ran into her impeccably made-up stepmother as soon as she walked through the door. Upon seeing her, he habitually began to lecture. "Kimberly, you finally decided to come back. How many nights have you been out? A young lady like you. What kind of example are you setting?" Kimberly didn't even glance at her. Instead, she violently smashed a half-person high blue porcelain vase at the entrance, with a loud crash. Fragments flew everywhere. Erin let out a frightened scream and took 2 steps back. Kimberly looked at her calmly, her bright and beautiful face full of sarcasm and coldness. "What do you think you are? A home wrecker? A mistress? How dare you lecture the legitimate daughter? Erin, remember, as long as I, Kimberly, am in this house for even one more day, you will never be able to hold your head up high." Her words were sharp and biting, each one striking a painful blow, leaving Erin pale with fury and trembling all over. "Kimberly, what madness is this now?" Gavin rushed out from the study upon hearing the commotion, quickly steadying the unsteady Erin, and glared furiously at Kimberly. "You cause chaos the moment you return. Can't you be a little more sensible?" Kimberly, watching her father shield that woman, her heart had long turned cold, leaving only endless irony. She let out a cold laugh. "I'm the one causing chaos. Fine. As long as you give me my share of the family assets in advance, I'll go abroad and never come back to bother you again." Gavin was taken aback, then put on a facade of concern. "Nonsense. Go abroad? What would a young woman like you do out there? Stay here. This will always be your home. We're family. One family." Kimberly sounded as if she had heard the biggest joke in the world. "Stop pretending. Gavin, you, her, and Grace, you are the real family. My mother is dead. And I no longer have a home. Just name your price. I want the share that I deserve." Gavin's face darkened. After a long silence, he said with feigned sincerity, "Dad knows you hold a grudge against the family. How about this? I'll give you 5 million first. Go out and relax for a while." 5 million. Kimberly let out a scornful laugh. "Gavin, the reason you've achieved what you have today is all thanks to my maternal grandfather's funds. It's all because of the dowry my mother brought. Even your life was saved at the cost of my mother's own. You're using my mother's money to support this mistress and illegitimate daughter, living in the house my mother bought, and now you think you can brush off her own daughter with just 5 million. Have you no shame?" Gavin was hit where it hurt. Flying into a shameful rage. Just how much do you want? Spit it out." Kimberly had come prepared. She pulled a document from her bag and calmly listed off a series of figures and stock equity names. "You're insane. That's impossible." Gavin completely exploded. "You're trying to empty half of the Colton family." Kimberly, however, remained unhurried. She walked to the window, looked down at the garden, and said in a light, airy tone, "You don't agree, that's fine too. I've planted bombs outside the villa. Either you agree to pay and sign this agreement, either we both die here today. Choose." Gavin, his pupils contracted sharply as he pointed at her, his finger trembling. You're insane." "Yes, I am insane," Kimberly admitted calmly, her gaze resolute. "Driven mad by you." Gavin, his face turned ashen, his breathing rapid as he stared fixedly at Kimberly, as if trying to determine whether she was telling the truth. Ultimately, the fear of death overwhelmed everything else. He slumped onto the sofa, drenched in cold sweat, his hands trembling as he signed Kimberly's property division agreement. Now get the bomb out of here." His voice was shaking. Kimberly picked up the agreement, carefully checked the signature, and a mocking, icy smile appeared on her face. "Don't worry, there's no bomb. Just kidding. After all, you tricked my mom into marrying you the same way, didn't you? Like father, like daughter." Gavin finally realized he had been played, so furious he nearly passed out, pointing at her. He stammered you, for a long time, unable to utter a single word. Kimberly couldn't be bothered to look at him anymore and turned to go upstairs. Stop, Gavin called out, panting, suppressing his anger. Your sister is bringing her boyfriend home for dinner today. I don't care how you've messed around before, but this time you absolutely must finish this meal properly. He deliberately emphasized his words, with a warning. Her boyfriend is Felix. You know what kind of standing the Francis family has in New York. We can't afford to offend them. Put away your rebellious streak and don't cause trouble for me. Kimberly's footsteps paused abruptly on the stairs, her back instantly stiff. Felix, today, he is going to visit as Grace's boyfriend. The next second, the door opened. Grace walked in arm with Felix, smiling brightly. Dad, Mom, I'm back. Gavin and his stepmother, who had just recovered, immediately put on enthusiastic smiles and went forward to greet them. They fussed over Grace and showed obsequious respect toward Felix. Only Felix, when his gaze fell on Kimberly, visibly frowned, as if only then realizing that Kimberly was actually Grace's sister. During the meal, at the long dining table, Grace and Felix naturally sat on one side, while Kimberly sat alone across from them, throughout the entire meal. Kimberly watched as Felix meticulously served dishes to Grace, peeled shrimp for her, and naturally picked up a napkin to wipe the sauce from the corner of her mouth. Erin watched this scene with a blossoming smile on her face. Grace, how did you and Mr. Felix meet? Tell your mother all about it. Grace blushed with shyness and said softly, it was at a charity gala. I saw a stray cat stuck in a tree and wanted to help it, but I almost fell myself. It was Felix who caught me. Later, he asked for my contact information. As she spoke, she cast an affectionate glance at Felix. Kimberly, however, couldn't help but let out a derisive snicker. Grace has hated small animals since childhood, even tortured her cat to death when she was young. How could she possibly take the initiative to save a cat? Either this is a deliberately staged act by her, or she wants to save it only to abuse it later. Her mocking laughter sounded particularly jarring in the quiet restaurant. And everyone turned to look at her. Grace slightly changed her expression and smiled. Kimberly, what about you? Have you been in a relationship these years? When will you bring someone back for us to meet? Kimberly, her red lips curved into a bright, bold smile. Bring them back? That won't do, Grace asked, puzzled. Why not? Kimberly, her smile grew even more unrestrained and bold, her gaze meaningfully sweeping over Felix before returning to Grace's face, her tone flippant. Because there are too many. I'm not as unappealing as you are. It took you 3 years to bring back just one. As for me, she drawled, like a sprite toying with the mortal world, the line of people chasing after me stretches from this Colton family villa all the way to Paris, France. Honestly, I just can't bring them all. Kimberly, Gavin snapped, his face turning livid as he slammed the table. Erin was also fuming, her chest heaving with anger. Grace looked aggrieved. Her eyes slightly reddened, helplessly gazing at Felix. Felix put down his chopsticks, wiped his hands with a napkin, and then, under everyone's gaze, took hold of Grace's hand resting on the table. Grace doesn't need to compare her charm with anyone. In my heart, no one can compare to her. She is the best, unparalleled. In one sentence, like a final verdict, it completely plunged Kimberly into the bottomless abyss. Grace smiled through her tears, gripping his hand in return. Her face beaming with happiness and pride, Kimberly watched their clasped hands, feeling as if her heart had been instantly crushed, the pain making it almost impossible to maintain her haughty facade. After dinner, the family of 4 sat happily chatting on the living room sofa. Kimberly had no interest in playing along with their happy family act, so she got up and went to the garden. The evening breeze carried the slight chill of early summer. Yet it couldn't dispel the suffocating weight in her heart. Before long, Grace followed her out, wearing a gentle yet irritatingly triumphant smile. Kimberly, enjoying the breeze all by yourself? Her voice was soft, but her tone carried undisguised provocation. Actually, I know why you're upset. People in our circle told me about those 3 years between you and Felix. Kimberly turned her back to her body stiffening slightly, but she did not look back, to be honest. When I first found out, I was a little worried. Grace walked to her side, studying her bright yet pale profile. After all, my Kimberly sister is so beautiful, what man wouldn't be tempted? What a pity, though, to have such a pretty face for nothing. Your mother couldn't compete with mine, and you can't compete with me either. These 3 years were nothing more than my charity to you. Now that the real one is back, it's time for you, the counterfeit, to make your exit. Kimberly slowly turned around. Under the moonlight, her eyes shone with an astonishing brightness, holding none of the anger or sorrow Grace had expected, only a cold, mocking derision. Charity. Her red lips curved into a smirk, each word enunciated clearly. Grace, have you been abroad for so long that you've forgotten what you are? A bastard child who only entered this household because her mother was a mistress. A pitiful creature who has to scheme to keep a man. Do you even deserve to talk about charity in front of me? Your mother picks up the trash mine discarded, and you pick up the man I didn't want. You and your mother are truly cut from the same cloth, specializing in taking what others have left behind. You. Grace's smile instantly froze on her face, her complexion turning pale then flushed with anger. She never expected Kimberly, even when trampled into the mud, to still be so sharp-tongued. What about me? Kimberly took a step forward, her presence overwhelming. You think you've won? He's just a man Kimberly grew tired of and discarded, and you picked him up like treasure, flaunting him everywhere. Grace, your vision is just that limited. Grace trembled with rage at her rapid-fire retorts, her carefully maintained gentle facade completely shattered. Kimberly, however, couldn't be bothered to waste any more words on her and turned to leave. Just as she turned around, Grace behind her suddenly let out a piercing scream, her forehead hitting the edge of the stone bench in the garden decoration, instantly covered in blood. Grace, almost simultaneously, Felix, Gavin, and Erin rushed out from the living room. Grace lay on the ground, clutching her bleeding forehead, her eyes brimming with tears. Dad, Mom, Felix, it's not Kimberly's fault, I just lost my balance. Erin immediately threw herself over to hold her daughter, wailing in grief. Grace, my daughter, why are you so foolish? She treated you like this. And you're still speaking up for her. Gavin, his face turned ashen as he pointed at Kimberly, unable to contain his fury. Kimberly, you ungrateful daughter. What have you done to your sister now? Kimberly stood in place, watching this carefully orchestrated frame-up with cold eyes, her heart as frozen as ice. Her gaze swept past her enraged father, her hypocritical stepmother, and finally, landed on Felix. He was crouched beside Grace, carefully examining her wound. Then he lifted his head, his deep eyes turning to her, devoid of their usual calmness, leaving only a piercing scrutiny. At that moment, her heart grew cold to the very marrow of her bones. He didn't believe her either, of course. Grace was the one who truly held his heart. Why would he believe her? Kimberly curled her lips and suddenly smiled. The next second, she walked over step by step, and under everyone's stunned gazes, grabbed a heavy ceramic flower pot nearby, and without hesitation smashed it hard onto Grace's forehead that had just been cut. Bang! A dull thud sounded, accompanied by Grace's even more piercing scream and the sound of everyone gasping in shock. Listen carefully. Kimberly let go, threw away the broken flower pot, her voice terrifyingly calm, but her eyes like poisoned daggers. I didn't do it just now, but now I am. Everyone was stunned, including Felix. Kimberly dropped the remaining ceramic fragments in her hand and turned to leave, but her wrist was suddenly seized by a tremendous force, the pain making her bones creak. Felix gripped her tightly, his face so dark it seemed to drip with gloom. He looked at Gavin, his voice cold as ice. Chairman Sheng, if your daughter's behavior isn't properly disciplined, I'm afraid I won't let this rest either. Gavin felt both heartache for Grace and fear of Felix's power, quickly nodding and bowing obsequiously. Mr. Felix, rest assured, I will definitely teach this insolent daughter who doesn't know her place a proper lesson. He immediately called for the bodyguards. Seize this rebellious daughter, drag her to the ancestral hall to kneel. How dare you? Kimberly struggled, glaring fiercely at her father. Gavin instead looked at Felix, fawning as he asked, Mr. Felix, what do you think? Making her kneel in the ancestral hall to reflect this punishment. Felix scooped up the bleeding Grace in his arms, his gaze icy as it swept over Kimberly, his thin lips parted, uttering words of utmost cruelty. Too light. I just noticed the horsewhip hanging in the study. It's not for decoration. With that, he strode away without looking back, still holding Grace. Kimberly stood thunderstruck, staring in disbelief at his retreating figure. He actually suggested Gavin to whip her with a horsewhip. Gavin immediately understood and yelled at the bodyguard. Did you hear that? Give her 30 lashes first, then drag her to the ancestral hall to kneel. She's not allowed to get up without my permission. Let me go, Gavin. You're not my father. You're a beast. Kimberly struggled desperately but was firmly pinned down by the bodyguards. She was forcibly dragged to the side hall, Erin holding that tough horsewhip, her face filled with glee and viciousness. You little bitch, just like your dead mother, you don't know what's good for you. Today I'll teach you a proper lesson on your father's behalf, Erin said, raising her whip and lashing it hard across Kimberly's back. Slap. Excruciating pain from torn flesh instantly shot through her. Kimberly was in so much agony that her vision went black, biting her lower lip to keep from screaming out. 1 lash, 2 lashes, 3 lashes. Erin seemed to be unleashing years of pent-up resentment, putting all her strength into every strike as if trying to tear the flesh from her bones. Kimberly was in so much pain that her whole body convulsed, her clothes soaked through with cold sweat, and her consciousness began to blur. Suddenly, she remembered that in the past, Felix had vaguely known about her strained relationship with her stepmother and had once frowned and asked her, "Do you need me to handle it?" She recalled that when she was in a bad mood and had sneaked off alone to her mother's grave in the middle of the night, he had somehow found her. In the pouring rain, he took off his coat and wrapped it around her, then silently drove her home. Recalling those moments when he occasionally revealed what she had mistaken for concern, back then, had he ever imagined that one day he would personally push her into such an irredeemable abyss? Cough. A sweet taste rose in her throat as she coughed up bloody foam, yet she let out a low, soft laugh. Erin was creeped out by her laughter and grew even more furious. "What are you laughing at, you little bitch?" Kimberly lifted her face covered in sweat and blood, staring at her with wolf-like ferocity as she spat out each word. "I'm laughing at you, mother and daughter, destined to use nothing but hand-me-downs, trash others have discarded. You." Erin trembled with rage, threw down the whip, and screamed at the servants nearby. "Go, bring me the electric baton, madam." "You mustn't, the young mistress will die." An elderly servant couldn't help but plead in protest. "Get out of my way." "Who gave you the right to speak here?" Erin shoved her aside, snatched the electric baton from the bodyguard, and struck Kimberly hard with it. Ooh! A violent electric shock and the sensation of impact instantly swept through her entire body. Kimberly clearly heard the cracking sound of her ribs breaking. She violently coughed up a large mouthful of blood, and her vision plunged completely into darkness. When she regained consciousness again, Kimberly found herself lying in her own bed, her entire body aching as if it had been crushed. The maid Emily was secretly applying medicine to her, wiping her tears while softly pleading, "Miss, please just yield to the master. Why must you suffer like this?" Kimberly shaking her head weakly, her voice hoarse. "Give in. Giving in to this family would only leave me picked clean to the bone." She paused, forcing a smile uglier than crying. "It's just a beating, after all. Grace got her head busted open by me too, so it's not a loss. I can take it." After saying that, she struggled to pull a bank card from under her pillow and shoved it into Emily's hand. "Emily, take this." Emily was startled and quickly refused. "Miss, this won't do. How could I possibly take your money?" "Take it," Kimberly said firmly. "This is something I prepared long ago. I'm going abroad, probably, won't be coming back. You're the old servant my mother brought from her maiden home, staying here now. They won't treat you well either. This money is enough for you to live out your years in comfort. Listen to me, resign, leave this place." Emily looking at the thin card in her hand, then at the bruised and battered Kimberly on the bed who still cared about her, she could no longer hold back. Tears streamed down her aged face, and with a thud, she was about to kneel down. Kimberly quickly stopped her, her voice weak but with a hint of coquettishness. "Emily, I kind of want to drink the lotus root and pork rib soup you make." Okay, I'll go make it right now, right now." Emily hurriedly wiped her tears, got up, and rushed to the kitchen. The room fell quiet again. Kimberly looked at the ornately decorated yet cold ceiling, slowly closed her eyes, and let despair and sorrow overwhelm her. In the following days, Kimberly stayed in her room to recover from her injuries, enduring the intense pain. She slowly packed all her belongings and also sorted out everything Felix had given her. He didn't love her, but he was certainly generous. The total value of these items was nearly 100 million. She initially wanted to throw them all away, but after second thought, she decided to call the owner of the high-end club she frequented. Hearing that the club was recently hosting a charity auction, she mentioned that she also had many items to auction off. The other party quickly replied, saying there was an event that very evening and invited her to attend. In the evening, Kimberly brought those large boxes to the club. After handing over the items to the auction organizer, she turned around and, as fate would have it, ran into Felix and Grace arriving together. Grace nestled close to Felix, and when she saw Kimberly, a hint of smugness and provocation flashed in her eyes. Kimberly subconsciously dug her fingers into her palms, but quickly released them. She had important matters to attend to today. There was no need to waste emotions on them. Felix's gaze seemed to linger on her overly pale face for a moment before indifferently shifting away. "As soon as I sat down, the lights suddenly dimmed. The host stepped onto the stage and excitedly announced that before the auction began, there would be a 3-minute kissing session, inviting all the couples present to enjoy themselves." Kimberly froze. The spotlight swept randomly across the dimly lit venue, illuminating pairs of men and women embracing and kissing. She instinctively turned around and saw not far away, Grace smiling as she wrapped her arms around Felix's neck. Felix looked down at her, the corner of his mouth seeming to lift almost imperceptibly, then leaned in and kissed her. In that instant, Kimberly's heart felt as if it were being tightly squeezed by an invisible hand. Countless images of intimate kisses with Felix flooded uncontrollably into her mind. Some were intense, some were domineering, some were filled with desire. Yet it seemed, there had never been a kiss so gentle, so full of tenderness and reverence. Just then, a drunken dandy stumbled over Ms. Kimberly, all alone and lonely. Let Big Brother keep you company. Kimberly struggled violently. Get away from me. But the man was very strong, and just as it seemed he was about to succeed. Suddenly the venue lights dimmed again, followed by the sound of the dandy being kicked flying to the ground. Then, someone quickly dragged him away from the scene. Kimberly's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the person who had taken action. It was Felix's personal bodyguard. She instinctively glanced in Felix's direction. In the darkness, she couldn't make out his expression, only his silhouette still holding Grace. When the lights came back on, he looked completely unruffled. As if nothing that had just happened had anything to do with him, Kimberly felt a tremor in her heart, followed by an overwhelming sense of irony. What does he mean by this? Protecting his white moonlight on one hand, while offering her help on the other, isn't it ridiculous? But there was no time to ponder further. As the auction soon officially began, the first item up for display was Kimberly's donation, that large collection of gifts that once belonged to Felix. With a starting bid directly set at 100 million, the entire hall erupted in uproar. Felix's gaze instantly sharpened. He narrowed his eyes and looked toward Kimberly's direction, clearly recognizing the origin of these items. Those familiar with him could tell this was a precursor to his anger. Kimberly met his gaze calmly, a faint trace of mockery even playing at the corners of her mouth. People began placing bids one after another. Grace tugged at Felix's sleeve and whispered, "Felix, that blue diamond is so beautiful. I like it." Felix remained silent for a few seconds before finally raising his bidding paddle. In the end, this collection of items was auctioned off for a staggering price of 1 billion and was won by Felix, who then turned around and presented it to the beaming Grace beside him. Kimberly thought sarcastically to herself, how could this not be considered a peculiar form of returning something to its original owner? During the intermission, she got up and went to the restroom to touch up her makeup. Just as she stepped out of the restroom, she saw Felix leaning against the wall in the corridor, smoking. The hazy smoke blurred his sharp, cold features but couldn't conceal the heavy gaze he directed at her. Kimberly kept her eyes straight ahead, intending to walk right past, but her wrist was suddenly grabbed by him. "Why did you auction off those things?" Kimberly didn't answer, but instead looked up and retorted with a sarcastic tone, "Why did you stand up for me just now?" Felix frowned slightly, about to speak. Kimberly took a step forward and said sarcastically, "Are you going to say it's because I'm Jane's best friend? Did she ask you to look after me?" She took another step closer, tilting her head to look up at his stern face, her red lips curling into a cold smile. "Could she also ask you to take care of my love life, Mr. Felix?" Felix pressed his fingers to his temples, looking somewhat weary, and finally said, "Kimberly, you're always like a hedgehog, covered in spines. What good does that do for you?" "What good? There may be no benefits, but if she weren't like a hedgehog, she would have been devoured by that family and his beloved Grace long ago, leaving not even bones behind." She was just about to speak when Felix continued, "Your last man was me. The next one can't be worse than me. That kind of guy from earlier isn't worthy of you. If you're lacking a man, I can introduce you to some." Kimberly was first stunned, then as if hearing the biggest joke of all time, she laughed until tears streamed down her face. Who did he think he was? After stabbing the deepest wound in her heart, now he had the audacity to comment on her dating standards. Was it out of possessiveness, or simply because he felt she had embarrassed him, the great CEO Chi? "Felix," she stopped laughing, her eyes cold and shattered. "My affairs have nothing to do with you. You don't need to worry about me either. As for men," she said flippantly, with a self-destructive mockery, "I can have as many as I want. The sky is high and the emperor is far away. You won't be able to control me in the future anyway." Felix seized on the key phrase, his tone darkening. "What do you mean? The sky is high and the emperor is far away. Where are you going?" Kimberly said nothing, forcefully shook off his hand, and turned to leave. Returning to her seat, she only wanted to leave this troublesome place as quickly as possible. However, when the next auction item was presented, Kimberly's gaze instantly froze. It was a sapphire necklace. Classic and elegant in style, it was her mother's most cherished keepsake from when she was alive. She suddenly looked at Grace, met her smug gaze, and instantly understood it must have been her father Gavin who secretly gave her mother's belongings to Grace, and Grace had the audacity to put them up for public auction. Kimberly could only sit back down, forcing herself to calm down and participate in the bidding. She couldn't just stand by and watch her mother's keepsakes fall into someone else's hands. After several rounds of fierce bidding, Kimberly finally managed to win the necklace at a price almost several times higher than its market value. She breathed a sigh of relief and was about to step onto the stage to receive it. Grace suddenly stood up. "Wait a moment." Grace said in a gentle voice, yet with unmistakable malice. Host, I'm sorry. I brought the wrong auction item. I don't want to auction this necklace, it's my personal collection. And I accidentally mixed it up. After saying this, she held the necklace and gave Kimberly a triumphant smile before turning to leave. Kimberly immediately chased after her and stopped her outside the venue. Grace, give me back the necklace. I'll give you however much money you want, Kimberly said urgently. Grace toyed with the necklace in her hand, smiling maliciously. I don't need money. She walked over to a nearby artificial lake, looked at the murky water, then turned to Kimberly and said, aren't you the one who loves beauty? Loves being pretty, and is the most proud? If you want it, go down and get it yourself. After saying this, she raised her hand and without hesitation threw the necklace into the lake, with almost no hesitation, amidst the astonished gazes and murmurs of the surrounding crowd. Kimberly leapt into the icy lake water. She desperately groped through the murky lake water, the mud staining her expensive dress and smearing her delicate makeup. Felix had just finished his cigarette and stepped outside when he witnessed this scene. Frowning deeply, he quickly walked to the edge of the lake, reached out his hand to her, and said in a tone laced with suppressed anger, Kimberly, get up here. Kimberly shook off his hand and continued searching with her head down, until her fingertips touched a cold, hard object. She clutched it tightly as if she had found a treasure, and then climbed out of the lake, completely drenched. Felix only then did he see clearly that what she had risked jumping into the lake to retrieve was nothing more than a small gemstone necklace, which even looked somewhat old. A surge of inexplicable anger rose in his heart, and he grabbed her arm. You donated billions without a second thought, and now you're risking your life for such a trivial little thing. Kimberly forcefully shook him off, her body trembling slightly from the cold and agitation. You don't understand anything. So don't stand there making sarcastic remarks. You're the one who said we're over. Then please just let me go, stop paying attention to me, and don't initiate conversations with me anymore. She stared into his eyes, enunciating each word clearly and deliberately. Brother-in-law. Felix jolted at the address, his pupils contracting slightly as he was about to speak. When Grace approached, her tone innocent yet smug. Kimberly, thank you for retrieving my thing for me. She reached out to take the necklace Kimberly was clutching tightly in her hand. Kimberly gripped it stubbornly, refusing to let go. This is mine. Grace looked at Felix with grievance. Felix, this was given to me by my mom. Felix looked at Kimberly's stubborn expression, then at Grace's hopeful eyes. His brow furrowed tightly. In the end, he reached out and firmly grabbed Kimberly's wrist. Let go. His voice was cold and hard. No. Kimberly glared at him with reddened eyes. Felix used force in his hands, almost brute strength, prying open her tightly clenched fingers one by one. Ah! A faint crisp sound accompanied Kimberly's muffled groan of extreme pain. Her wrist had actually been broken by him with brute force. Excruciating pain instantly swept over her. Her face turned deathly pale, sweat beaded on her forehead, and she stared in disbelief at the cold and cruel man before her. Grace took the opportunity to snatch the necklace, cast a triumphant glance at Kimberly, then linked arms with Felix and said softly, Felix, let's go inside to get our coats and leave. Felix nodded, his gaze complex as he glanced at Kimberly, who was curled up in pain, but ultimately turned around, ready to leave with Grace. However, just as they entered the club, a heavy wrought-iron chandelier hanging overhead suddenly came loose for some reason and plummeted straight toward Grace. Felix reacted swiftly, shoving Grace aside, but the edge of the chandelier still grazed the back of Grace's head. Grace. Felix's face changed drastically. He immediately picked up Grace and rushed anxiously to the parking lot to take her to the hospital. Kimberly clutched her broken wrist, almost fainting from the pain, and was also taken to the hospital by kind passers-by. The orthopedic doctor, looking at her injuries, couldn't help but exclaim, this. Who could be so cruel as to do this to a young girl like you? Kimberly's face was pale, her lips trembling, and the heartache far surpassed the physical pain. The doctor also said her wrist injury was severe and she needed to be hospitalized for a few days of observation. So, Kimberly had no choice but to stay in the hospital. However, shortly after she was settled into her room, Felix burst in, radiating a chilling aura. His face was terrifyingly grim, and he looked at her as if he wanted to devour her whole. Kimberly, I checked the surveillance footage. You bribed the club staff to deliberately loosen the light fixture, intending to kill Grace, didn't you? Kimberly found it absurd and looked at him coldly. I didn't. Besides you, who else would harbor such malice towards Grace? Kimberly, I truly underestimated you. Lawless, you're capable of anything. I told you I didn't. You have no right to slander me. Slander. Felix said with an icy glare. It seems I need to teach you a lesson before you'll tell the truth. He took out his phone, made a call, and coldly instructed the person on the other end. Contact the police department. the second daughter of the Colton family, Kimberly, is suspected of intentional assault. Send someone over. Let her spend a few days in detention to clear her head. Felix. Kimberly stared at him in horror, unable to believe he would actually use his connections to have her thrown in a detention center. However, no matter how much she struggled, explained, or cried out, it was all in vain. Soon, people in uniforms arrived at the hospital room and, ignoring the doctor's objections and her injuries, forcibly took her away. The following few days were, for Kimberly, nothing short of a living hell. There, she, the once willful and radiant Ms. Kimberly, suffered immensely. The people in the same cell seemed to have received special instructions, bullying her in every way, punching and kicking. Her already injured wrist was maliciously stomped on again and again, bone by bone cracking. A few days later, when she was released, she was almost unrecognizable, covered in wounds, and on the verge of death. What sustained her as she crawled out of hell was a message she had just received on her phone. Her visa had finally been approved. She took a taxi back to the villa, intending to grab her luggage and rush to the airport, but as soon as she entered, she ran into her best friend Jane, who had just returned from her world trip and, upon learning everything, had hurried over. Jane took one look at her and immediately burst into tears, hugging her tightly and apologizing non-stop. Kimberly, I'm so sorry, it's all my fault. Back then, I just didn't like your uncle's ex-girlfriend, and knowing he couldn't get over her, I deliberately provoked you into messing with him. I never thought it would turn out like this. I had no idea his first love was Grace. If I had known, I would have never let you go. Kimberly shook her head, her voice hoarse. It's not your fault. It's all in the past. I've let it all go. Jane, I'm planning to go abroad, and I probably won't be coming back. Jane froze, quickly speaking up to stop her. Kimberly, don't go. Stay in the country. I'll take care of you. I'll protect you. No, Kimberly spoke softly. There's nothing left here worth holding on to. Jane cried even harder, but seeing the lifelessness and determination in Kimberly's eyes, she knew she could no longer keep her. With reddened eyes, she could only help Kimberly pack the final belongings. Before leaving, Kimberly took one last look at the house that held all her childhood memories, but was now occupied by her father along with his mistress and their illegitimate daughter. She took out the gasoline she had prepared long ago, ignoring the servant's pleas, and expressionlessly poured it before setting it ablaze. Flames soared into the sky, devouring everything of the past. Carrying her last piece of luggage, she turned away resolutely. Jane drove her to the airport, apologizing non-stop along the way, offering to give her the entire garage of luxury cars as compensation. Kimberly shook her head, leaned against the car window, and watched the scenery speeding by outside. Whispering softly, no need, only by letting go of the wrong ones can we meet the right one. She forced a smile, with the relief and exhaustion of having survived a disaster. Kimberly, am so beautiful. If I want to, the men in the future will only be better and better, richer and richer, and love me more and more. Jane quickly chimed in. Right, our Kimberly is the most beautiful. You will definitely meet someone who cherishes you like a treasure in the future. At the airport, Jane held on to her tightly, crying uncontrollably. Kimberly, you must live a very, very good life, and make those people eat their words. Kimberly hugged her back, gently patted her back, then let go, waved her hand, and turned to walk towards the security checkpoint. Jane watched her figure disappear at the end of the corridor, and could no longer hold back. Squatting on the ground as she burst into tears, she cried for who knows how long before finally gathering her courage. Filled with anger and resentment, and dialed Felix's number. The phone rang for a long time before it was finally answered. Uncle, Jane said with a heavy nasal tone, her voice sharp and aggressive, I know you like Grace, but after all, Kimberly has been with you for 3 years. She's leaving now, never coming back. How could you not even bother to come see her off? The other end of the phone fell into a deathly silence. A few seconds later, Felix's voice came through, carrying a rare, almost imperceptible tension and hoarseness. You said, who's gone? Jane, her tearful accusation, like a stone thrown into an icy lake, sent violent ripples across the seemingly calm surface of Felix's heart. His fingers gripping the phone tightened almost imperceptibly, the knuckles turning slightly white. Kimberly, she's gone. She took the earliest flight abroad. She said she's never coming back. Uncle, are you satisfied now? Jane practically screamed. Then hung up the phone with a violent crash. The receiver emitted a series of urgent beeps. Felix remained frozen in place, still holding the phone to his ear. The opulent crystal chandelier in the office cast a cold light, illuminating his sharply defined profile. No emotion was visible, except for a fleeting shatter deep within his profound eyes, quickly buried beneath an even thicker layer of ice. Gone, abroad, never coming back. These words combined together, like a tiny ice needle, unexpectedly pierced the most hidden corner of his heart, bringing a sharp and unfamiliar sting. But the calm self-control cultivated from long years in a position of authority, as well as his love for Grace, made him almost instinctively suppress this unwarranted emotional fluctuation. He furrowed his brows, tossed the phone back onto the table, and tried to refocus on the crucial merger case file in front of him. However, the dense text and numbers now seemed like a chaotic swarm of ants crawling before his eyes, impossible to focus on. His mind uncontrollably replayed the look Kimberly gave him before being taken to the detention center, shattered, desperate, with a strong sense of hatred, yet deeply hidden with an unspeakable pain. He irritably loosened his tie and stood up, walking to the huge floor-to-ceiling window. Outside the window was the bustling, dazzling night view of New York, with streams of traffic and flashing neon lights, yet it couldn't illuminate the turmoil in his heart at this moment. An unprecedented, uncontrollable feeling quietly sprouted like vines, wrapping around his heart. As if guided by some supernatural force, he grabbed his car keys and strode out of the office. While the elevator descended, he dialed the airport director's private number, his tone leaving no room for argument. Find out which outbound flight Kimberly is on. Now, when he arrived at the airport at an astonishing speed, even running a red light, and rushed into the international departure hall, the airport director was already waiting there with trepidation, handing over the newly found information. Mr. Felix, MS, Kimberly is on flight FX-108 to Paris. The plane took off 20 minutes ago. Felix suddenly halted in his tracks. He lifted his head and gazed at the massive flight information display screen. The status bar for flight FX-108 clearly displayed 3 chilling green characters in Simsun font. Departed. He stood rigidly in the bustling hall, amidst the constant flow of people, like a sculpture that had suddenly lost its soul. In his ears echoed the sounds of announcements in various languages, the rolling of suitcase wheels, and the chatter and laughter of travelers. All these sounds seemed to come through a thick pane of glass, becoming blurred and distant. For the first time, he understood so clearly what it meant to miss and what it meant to lose control. Something important seemed to be forcibly torn away from the tightly woven trajectory of his life. At that moment, the phone in his pocket vibrated again, and the name Grace flashed on the screen. He took a deep breath and answered the call. Grace's delicate voice came through, tinged with just the right amount of dependence. Felix, my head still feels a bit dizzy, and the wound is aching faintly. I'm so scared being alone in the hospital. Can you come and stay with me? In the past, hearing her voice like that, he would have dropped everything and rushed over immediately. But now, as he watched the fading light of the airplane that had just disappeared into the night sky outside the window, a faint, almost imperceptible trace of irritation brushed across his heart, one he hadn't even bothered to examine closely. He remained silent for a few seconds before finally responding. I'm coming." When he arrived at the VIP hospital room, Grace was leaning against the headboard, her face somewhat pale. Upon seeing him enter, a joyful and gentle smile immediately spread across her face. Felix sat by the bedside as Grace nestled closer to him, speaking softly, but he seemed somewhat distracted. Grace sensitively noticed his unusual silence and cautiously probed. "Felix, are you worried about Kimberly? I heard from Dad that she went abroad. She does have a fiery temper, and this time she went too far. It might be good for her to go abroad and clear her mind. When she comes to her senses, maybe she'll come back. Let's not talk about her anymore." Felix interrupted her, his tone indifferent and unreadable. Grace was taken aback for a moment, then obediently nodded, the smile flickering in her eyes. What she didn't know was that after she fell asleep, Felix took out his phone again. His finger hovered over the screen for a moment before he finally opened his assistant's chat window and typed a line. "Keep an eye on Kimberly's activities abroad. Compile a weekly briefing for me." Yet, just as his fingertip was about to touch the send button, his movement froze. What was he doing? Was a former bed partner, already over and done with, worth this much attention? A vague sense of self-loathing surged within him. With a flick of his finger, he swiftly deleted the drafted message, as if trying to erase that momentary lapse of his life after getting back together with Grace seemed, to outsiders, perfect and enviable. They were well matched in social status. A talented man and a beautiful woman, Grace was gentle, considerate, and complied with his every wish. Felix also fulfilled all the duties expected of a boyfriend, having meals with her, driving her to and from work, attending necessary social events. But only Felix himself knew that beneath this seemingly perfect life lay an indescribable tedium and a profound sense of dullness. While reviewing documents by the floor-to-ceiling window in his office, he would suddenly lose focus, remembering how once upon a time, Kimberly, like a sly little imp, would slip in during his busiest moments, wrap her arms around him from behind, deliberately breathing orchid-scented whispers into his ear. disrupting all his work rhythm only to end up pressed against the cold glass window by him, punished until she tearfully begged for mercy. While aboard his private jet, he would instinctively glance toward that cramped restroom, recalling how Kimberly had once boldly provoked him there, only to end up so thoroughly exhausted that her legs gave way, wrapped in a blanket as he carried her out. All while she muttered defiantly under her breath, these untimely memories, like ghosts, would surface at his most unguarded moments, leaving him deeply unsettled. He attributed this feeling to mere unfamiliarity. After all, a habit cultivated over 3 years takes time to change. He took Grace to that private kitchen they used to frequent, the one that required reservations months in advance. The dishes were still exquisite, the ambience still elegant. Grace ate in small bites, occasionally commenting on which dish was too high in calories and required watching one's figure. Felix ate in silence, yet inexplicably thought of Kimberly, that little glutton who would always seize the moment he wasn't paying attention to quickly snatch the dish she had her eye on from his bowl. She'd end up with tears in her eyes from the spiciness, panting with her tongue out, but still stubbornly insisting it was delicious. In the end, she would always drink from his cup to ease the spiciness and assert with full confidence, "What's yours is mine." That meal was always eaten in a chaotic uproar, yet it was full of life. But the meal before him now was so quiet that only the faint clinking of utensils remained, so stifling it almost suffocated him. At night, he habitually slept on the inner side of the bed, half asleep and half awake. His arm instinctively reached out to the side, and what he touched was a warm, soft, and yielding body. Grace snuggled up obediently, exuding a carefully chosen, subtle fragrance. No, the body temperature was off. It lacked that vibrant, scorching warmth. The scent was wrong. It didn't have that natural, slightly sweet body aroma. Even the faint sound of breathing during sleep was off. Kimberly was an extremely restless sleeper, unconsciously hogging the blankets, and like a little animal seeking warmth, she would drowsily burrow into his embrace. Wrapping herself around him with both arms and legs, Felix suddenly opened his eyes, a strong sense of rejection surging within him. For the first time, he almost roughly pushed away the snuggling Grace, got out of bed, and said with a barely noticeable chill in his tone, "You sleep. I just remembered there's an urgent document I need to handle." After saying this, ignoring Grace's stunned and hurt expression, he walked straight into the study and closed the door. He needed to be alone. Needed to calm down, needed to drive that increasingly clear figure out of his mind. A week later, at an important business banquet, Felix attended with Grace. Grace, dressed in an expensive gown, was well-mannered, gentle and graceful, handling herself with ease, earning praise from many present. Everyone thought they were a perfect match made in heaven, but Felix found the occasion unbearably dull. The air thick with the scent of champagne and perfume made it hard for him to breathe. During the banquet, a socialite, out of jealousy, deliberately spilled red wine on Grace's dress. Grace immediately teared up, looking at Felix with a pitiful expression, on the verge of tears as if she had suffered a great injustice, needing his protection and comfort. In the past, Felix would have thought she was fragile and in need of care, but at this moment, watching her tears, he inexplicably thought of Kimberly. If she were in this situation, she would probably be stunned for a moment, then raise an eyebrow and flash a willful yet radiant smile. She might even casually splash the wine from her own glass back, and nonchalantly say, "Sorry, my hand slipped," never showing the slightest hint of timidity or dependence in front of others. That kind of vibrant vitality was as scorching and dazzling as a wildfire. This stark contrast startled him, and the crack in a certain corner of his heart grew wider and wider. At that moment, a young man from a prominent family who had a grudge against the Colton family and was known for his sharp tongue, came swaying over to offer a toast, accompanied by a new girlfriend whose features somewhat resembled Kimberly. Slightly drunk, the man teased provocatively, "Well, if it isn't Mr. Felix. Long time no see. I heard the wildest, most thrilling red rose in your backyard was taken away, pot and all, and is now living it up abroad. TSK, TSK, what a shame. I've always wondered when I'd get the chance to have a taste." Bang! Before he could finish his sentence, a dull thud echoed. Felix suddenly and without warning threw a fierce punch right into the man's face. The move was swift, precise, and ruthless. Caught completely off guard, the playboy let out a sharp cry as he was knocked to the ground, blood instantly gushing from his nose. The entire venue fell into dead silence in an instant. Everyone was stunned, staring at this sudden turn of events. Felix stood under the light, calmly straightening his slightly disheveled sleeves from the movement. His gaze was as dark and icy as a Siberian cold front, and the oppressive aura radiating from him seemed to drop the surrounding temperature by several degrees. He looked down at the person groaning on the ground, his voice quiet but each word sharp as an ice blade. "What kind of thing do you think you are? You dare mention her, with that. He no longer looked at the person on the ground or the stunned guests around him. He tossed out a final warning, "Watch your mouth," then took the equally frightened Grace by the hand and strode away through the eerie silence. This was the first time in his life that he had lost his composure so completely in such an important public setting, and the reason was simply because of someone's frivolous mention of Kimberly. On the way home, the atmosphere in the car was oppressive. Grace seemed to have been frightened, and it took a long time before she timidly spoke up, carefully hinting, "Felix, today your mother called again to ask us, when we're thinking about getting married, what do you think?" Felix gazed at the night scenery rapidly receding outside the window, rubbed his temples, and said with a barely noticeable tone of weariness and perfunctoriness, "There are several cross-border mergers and acquisitions at the company that have reached a critical stage recently. Things are busy, so let's talk about it another time." Grace, her eyes dimmed, and she said nothing more. Late at night, Felix stayed alone in the study, as if guided by some inexplicable impulse. He opened an encrypted photo album on his phone. Inside, there was only a very short video from a friend's gathering a few years ago, where someone had egged Kimberly on to sing. She confidently jumped onto the stage, snatched the microphone, and sang an upbeat pop song. In the video, she was radiant and vibrant, her smile as bright as summer sunshine, her eyes sparkling with liveliness. She was like a fiercely burning flame, instantly illuminating the somewhat dim and noisy private room, and it was as if she also illuminated his then darkened heart. When did he save this video? He himself had forgotten, looking at the carefree and spirited figure on the screen. And comparing it to the stagnant life he now led, Felix felt as if an invisible hand had clenched his heart tightly, bringing on a suffocating, dull ache. He abruptly turned off the video, flipped his phone face down on the table, his chest heaving violently. He refused to delve deeper into the origin of this emotion. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, 3 years had passed. At Capital International Airport, Felix returned from a business trip for an important cross-border cooperation project. Grace accompanied him as his fiancée, keeping a low profile. They took the VIP channel to avoid the hustle and bustle of ordinary passengers. However, as soon as they stepped out of the channel, an overwhelming roar of noise hit them. The arrival hall was packed with a massive crowd. Countless young boys and girls were holding up flashing lightboards, flowers, and posters, fervently and rhythmically chanting the same name in unison, "Kimberly, Kimberly, Kimberly." The roar of the crowd was almost enough to lift the airport roof. Many ordinary travelers also stopped in their tracks, curiously looking around and chattering among themselves. "Who is that? Such a huge commotion. You don't know, Kimberly, the top superstar right now. She debuted 3 years ago and was called the Millennium Beauty. So gorgeous, and her acting is amazing too. Oh my God, I never thought I'd run into her. I absolutely adore her." Felix's footsteps involuntarily halted upon hearing that name, which was etched deep into his very bones. Instinctively, he followed the sound and the gazes of the crowd, his eyes sweeping over the sea of bobbing heads until they finally settled on a massive billboard hanging from a huge pillar across the passageway. On the billboard, the woman's makeup was flawlessly exquisite. Her features even more radiant and striking than they had been 3 years ago, shedding some of the youthful immaturity and willfulness. Her expression now carried a calm confidence, polished by the passage of time. She was dressed in the latest season's haute couture gown from a top luxury brand. Her gaze was cool and distant, yet it held a powerful aura of someone in complete control. She was breathtakingly beautiful, so much so that one hardly dared to look directly at her. Kimberly. Felix's heart felt as if it had been struck hard by a heavy hammer in that instant. The dull pain from the sudden contraction made his breathing stop for a second. He stood there, his gaze locked tightly on the huge poster, as all the noise around him seemed to fade away in an instant, leaving only that dazzling, star-like figure in his world. At that moment, Grace also saw the billboard. She instinctively grabbed Felix's arm, her voice filled with unconcealed surprise and a hint of barely noticeable sourness. "Felix, that's Kimberly. I had heard she went abroad to develop her career these past few years, apparently becoming a celebrity, but I never expected her to be this popular, giving up being a proper young lady to go into the entertainment industry. Although she does have many fans now." Her voice was rambling on, carrying a deliberate tone of belittlement and unease. But Felix acted as if he hadn't heard. It wasn't that he didn't know. Over the past 3 years, although he had never actively sought her out, news about her would always find its way to his ears through various channels. Unintentionally, he knew she had peaked from her debut, knew every one of her films was both critically acclaimed and commercially successful, knew how many prestigious awards she had won. He had even secretly asked his assistant to buy all her movie ticket stubs and collect posters and merchandise from the brands she endorsed. hiding them in the most concealed drawer of his study. He just never allowed himself to go find her. His gaze, like the most precise radar, cut through the surging crowd and locked firmly onto the figure who had just emerged from the regular passageway, closely escorted by bodyguards and assistants. She was even more dazzling in person than on the posters. Dressed in a simple white shirt and jeans, with a khaki trench coat over them, sunglasses covered most of her face, but they couldn't hide her innate star quality and carefree aura. She smiled and waved to the frenzied fans on either side, her demeanor elegant and poised, yet with just the right touch of aloofness. Just as Felix was gazing at her greedily, almost breathlessly, across the sea of people, a tall, handsome man in a dark blue casual suit, with a hint of unruly boldness, suddenly broke through the crowd with a grin, holding a strikingly large bouquet of Ecuadorian roses, and stepped forward to greet her. It was Bruno, the heir to the Derek family, also a well-known playboy in the circle, but from a prominent family and exceptionally capable himself. Bruno naturally took the carry-on luggage from Kimberly's hand, leaned down to her ear, and whispered something unknown. Kimberly was actually amused by him and let out a soft laugh. That smile instantly dispelled the coldness on her face, making her look vivid and lively. She even raised her hand and gently tapped Bruno's shoulder with a hint of coquetry. The interaction between them was intimate and natural, filled with a tacit understanding that no one else could break into. Felix watched this scene, and his face darkened instantly. The air pressure around them suddenly dropped, even causing Grace beside them to shiver involuntarily. They were practically pushed along by the crowd, arriving at the parking lot. Coincidentally, Felix's car happened to be parked near the conspicuous stretch Lincoln belonging to Kimberly's team. Felix saw Bruno eagerly holding the car door open for Kimberly, one hand considerately protecting her head to prevent her from bumping it. Just as Kimberly bent down to get in the car, she seemed to sense something, suddenly turned her head, and her gaze pierced through the not-too-far distance, directly crashing into Felix's eyes. At that moment, time seemed to truly stand still. Felix's heart leaped into his throat, and he could even clearly hear the sound of his own blood flowing. He saw her eyes behind the sunglasses widen slightly, revealing a fleeting moment of surprise. But it was only for a moment. In the next second, all the emotions in those astonishingly beautiful eyes quickly faded away, returning to a state of calm, unrippled water, even carrying a sense of polite and distant detachment. As if looking at a stranger, she only gave an extremely slight, almost imperceptible nod in his direction, as if merely acknowledging an unimportant fan who had recognized her. Then, as if nothing had happened, she withdrew her gaze, bent down, and got into the car, without the slightest pause from start to finish. Bruno also noticed Felix. He closed the car door and, through the window, provocatively and clearly raised an eyebrow in Felix's direction, a playful smirk curling at the corner of his lips. Before walking around to the driver's seat and starting the engine, the black stretch Lincoln let out a low roar, speeding away in a cloud of dust and disappearing through the exit of the airport parking lot. Felix stood frozen in place, his entire body cold as ice. Grace called out to him timidly several times, but he seemed not to hear her at all. All he could hear was a persistent ringing in his ears, and a sharp voice echoed relentlessly in his mind. She saw him clearly, yet, she completely, utterly, ignored him. Returning to the luxurious hotel suite where she was staying, Felix threw himself heavily onto the sofa. Outside the window was a dazzling night scene, vibrant and colorful, yet it couldn't reflect in his dark and gloomy eyes at all. He stayed up all night. The scene at the airport played over and over in his mind. Kimberly, her eyes, calm and unruffled behind sunglasses, swept over him as if he were an insignificant passerby. The intimate interaction between her and Bruno, so natural and oblivious to others, was glaringly conspicuous. And then there was Bruno's final provocative eyebrow raise. Every detail was like a needle dipped in poison, densely piercing his nerves, stirring up waves of unbearable pain and panic. Yes, panic, a sense of uncontrolled panic, unlike anything he had ever experienced. Washed over him like a cold tide, silently submerging him. He found he couldn't bear Kimberly looking at him with that expression in her eyes, and even less could he stand the sight of another man by her side, a man who seemed so perfectly matched with her, who might even have already claimed a place in her heart. This unfamiliar emotion left him deeply unsettled, even a little flustered. He abruptly stood up, walked to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a glass of strong liquor, and downed it in one gulp. The scalding liquid slid down his throat, yet it couldn't extinguish the sinister fire raging in his heart. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant's number. His voice was unusually hoarse and icy from a sleepless night and suppressed fury. Immediately, find out Kimberly's detailed address in New York, her entire schedule for the next week, and that Bruno, what has he been doing these past 3 years? What exactly is his relationship with Kimberly? I want the most detailed report, the faster the better. After issuing the command, he paced the room like a caged beast, waiting for news. Every minute and every second felt excruciatingly long. A few hours later, the assistant called back, reporting the investigation results in a cautious and detailed tone. Kimberly's address and itinerary were listed one by one. As for the information about Bruno, it made Felix's heart sink even further. Bruno comes from a prominent family, possesses outstanding abilities himself, but has a flamboyant and unrestrained personality, known in the circle as a notorious playboy. However, since Kimberly went abroad 3 years ago, this playboy seemed to have suddenly changed his ways, almost shifting his career focus to Europe, often staying in Paris. As an investor, he quietly paved the way for Kimberly, using his connections and resources to help her quickly establish herself in the fashion and film industries. Over these 3 years, he has almost taken on the role of a guardian, staying by Kimberly's side. The two have a close relationship and are widely known as good friends, but whether it has developed into a romantic one remains a topic of speculation. Good friends? Felix hung up the phone, let out a cold laugh, his eyes turning gloomy. What kind of pure just friends can a man and a woman really have? Bruno's intentions are as clear as day, and Kimberly, how could she allow a man like that to get so close to her? A strong sense of hostility and an unprecedented feeling of crisis, like a venomous snake, tightly coiled around Felix's heart. For the first time, he felt such a profound aversion to the name Bruno, and an emotion he was unwilling to admit even to himself: jealousy. He really wanted to see Kimberly, really wanted to. Fortunately, the opportunity came just a week later. The assistant reported that Kimberly would attend an after-party for a top haute couture brand. Felix immediately used his connections to obtain an invitation. The party was held in a historic private estate, filled with elegantly dressed guests and clinking glasses. Felix, the moment he entered, his gaze swept across the room like a precision radar, quickly locking onto the most dazzling figure even among the glittering stars. Kimberly was wearing a sapphire blue velvet floor-length gown that made her skin appear as fair as snow and her figure graceful and elegant. She was conversing with several internationally renowned directors and producers, carrying herself with poise and grace. Her smile was appropriate, and she effortlessly switched between fluent French and English, exuding a powerful and confident aura. She was a far cry from the girl who, 3 years ago, had been either willful or overly cautious in front of him. Felix held a wine glass, staring at her from across the crowd, his heart feeling as if it were being tightly clenched by something. He waited patiently until he saw that she seemed a bit tired and was heading alone toward the terrace leading to the garden to rest. Now is the moment. He followed her discreetly. The night breeze on the terrace was slightly cool. Kimberly was leaning against the railing, gazing at the sparkling surface of the distant lake. Her profile, bathed in moonlight, appeared somewhat aloof and solitary. Felix walked up behind her, close enough to catch the faint, cold scent of her perfume, a stark contrast to what he remembered. He took a deep breath, suppressing the turmoil in his heart, but when he spoke, his tone unconsciously carried a condescending, accusatory edge, one that even he hadn't realized had become a habit. What's going on between you and Bruno? Kimberly didn't seem surprised by his appearance, not even turning her head. She merely gently swirled her champagne glass, her voice calm and detached with polite distance. Mr. Felix. Long time no see. Who I'm involved with doesn't seem to require reporting to you. That Mr. Felix and her distant attitude felt like an ice pick, stabbing straight into Felix's heart. He took a step closer, almost able to feel the cool aura emanating from her. His tone couldn't help but carry a hint of anxiety and sharpness. Kimberly, after being away for 3 years, have you lost even your basic judgment? Bruno, what kind of man is he, don't you know? The women around him never stop changing. A playboy, cynical and irresponsible. What can he possibly offer you? Kimberly finally turned around slowly. Under the moonlight, her beautiful peach blossom eyes tilted slightly upward, holding no anger, no grievance, only a hint of near-pitying mockery. Her red lips parted, each word enunciated clearly. Mr. Felix seems in no position to judge others. She paused, her gaze sweeping over his tense jawline, her tone airy yet carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds. Bruno is a playboy. Coincidentally, I used to be famously known as a playboy in the social circle. The two of us are quite a match, at the very least, she emphasized, her gaze sharp as a blade. Bruno never denies his affection for me, and he respects all my choices and wishes, unlike some people. Her gaze pierced straight into Felix's eyes, icy with complete understanding. You've had someone else in your heart from start to finish, yet you still used the pretense of giving it a try to waste 3 whole years of my youth. Felix, who do you think is more despicable? These words landed like sharp, resounding slaps, striking Felix hard across the face. his face instantly turned grim. His throat seemed blocked by something. He opened his mouth, only to find himself utterly speechless. A raging fury and an indescribable, bitter ache churned within him, threatening to tear him apart. Just then, a lazy yet distinctly displeased voice cut in. "Well, no wonder I couldn't find you. Turns out you're being pestered by someone irrelevant." Bruno strode over on his long legs, reaching out with extreme naturalness to wrap his arm around Kimberly's waist. His posture both intimate and fiercely protective, he looked at Felix, a roguish smile playing on his lips, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "Mr. Felix, long time no see. So, what were you chatting about with my girlfriend? The atmosphere seems a bit tense, doesn't it?" The words girlfriend exploded in Felix's ears like 3 heavy bombs. His pupils contracted sharply as he stared at Kimberly, his heart gripped by an invisible hand so tightly it nearly stopped beating. He stared at her intensely, a trace of unconscious, desperate pleading in his eyes, hoping she would deny it even if just with a frown. However, Kimberly simply tilted her head slightly, leaning toward Bruno, silently confirming his words without even sparing Felix a single glance. Bruno took in Felix's reaction, the corner of his mouth curling into an even more flamboyant smirk. His tone carried undisguised provocation. "I heard Mr. Felix has some, well, past history with our Kimberly. But that's all in the past. Kimberly is under my care now, doing perfectly fine, so there's no need for Mr. Felix to trouble yourself." He paused, his gaze meaningfully sweeping over the empty space behind Felix before continuing. "By the way, where's your Grace? Didn't bring her along for some fun? Don't neglect the beauty and leave her waiting alone in an empty room." Having said that, he gave Felix no further opportunity to speak, wrapping his arm around Kimberly's waist. He turned and walked away with effortless grace, as if merely dismissing an insignificant nuisance. Felix stood frozen in place, watching helplessly as their figures retreated together. Kimberly didn't even glance back, his hand hanging at his side was clenched tightly into a fist, the knuckles turning a frightening pale white from excessive force, with veins bulging prominently on the back of his hand. An unprecedented, sharp, bone-chilling jealousy and uncontrollable rage surged and burned like molten lava within his chest. For the first time, he tasted so clearly and deeply what it meant to feel a pain that pierced straight to the heart. After returning from the party, Felix had an alarmingly low and oppressive aura around him. Grace sensitively noticed his unusual behavior and became even more cautious, offering constant care and attention, trying to soothe his restlessness with tenderness. That evening, she entered Felix's room carrying a cup of warm milk and saw him standing by the window smoking, his silhouette lonely and rigid. She walked over and spoke softly. "Felix, have you been too tired lately? Would you like me to massage your head? Remember when we first met? There was a time I almost fell off a ladder trying to rescue a kitten stuck in a tree, and after you caught me, we got together. After that, I used to massage you like this, and you said it felt really good." She was trying to evoke his warmth and memories by recalling the romantic story of their first encounter. However, as Felix listened to her words, his frown only deepened. For some reason, a long-forgotten whisper from an old servant of the Colton family suddenly flashed through his mind, saying that Miss Grace seemed to have been a bit averse to small animals as a child, even secretly killing a neighbor's cat, and there was Kimberly's scornful mockery about it in the past. He had never paid it any mind, even thinking that Kimberly was maliciously slandering her, but now it was like a seed quietly sprouting in his heart. He calmly pushed Grace's hand away, his tone indifferent. "No need, I'd like to be alone for a while." Grace's eyes darkened, but she dared not say more, retreating sullenly. Sometimes, the turning points of fate arrive without warning. A few days later, Felix's exceptionally capable assistant, while organizing a batch of old archives transferred from the country, unexpectedly discovered a copy of an investigation report that had been deliberately concealed for several years. It was an analysis of the suspicious circumstances surrounding Kimberly's mother's fatal car accident years ago. The report indicates that the car accident was not merely an accident. There are suspicions of human manipulation, and the biggest beneficiary points directly to the rapidly rising Colton family group, which was taken over by Gavin. Almost simultaneously, the informant planted by Felix within the Colton family group also sent an urgent message. The Colton family group had long been an empty shell. Gavin had embezzled huge amounts of public funds in recent years, laundering money and transferring assets through complex overseas transactions, and Grace and her daughter Erin not only knew about it but were deeply involved. The Colton family is now heavily in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy. What struck Felix like a thunderbolt was a secret recording sent by the informant shortly after. The recording contained Grace's phone conversation with one of her so-called best friends. The voices were clear, the tone smug and malicious. "MPH, If I hadn't deliberately fallen off that broken ladder back then, pretending to save the cat, how could I have gotten Felix to notice me? Men like him totally fall for the delicate and pitiful act. That incident in the garden was also staged by me. I knew Felix was about to come out, so I timed it perfectly and threw myself into it. And the light fixture at the clubhouse, I paid someone to loosen that too. Originally, I wanted it to hit harder, to make Felix feel even more sorry for me and completely grow to despise that bitch Kimberly, who knew it would just graze me, but the effect was the same anyway. Haha, what does she, Kimberly, amount to? Is she even worthy of competing with me? Felix has only ever had me in his heart from start to finish. I just used a little trick, and he believed it, even had Kimberly locked up for several days. So satisfying, one by one, piece by piece, the truth, like the sharpest scalpel, brutally dissected the beliefs that Felix had held as unshakable for the past few years. The kind, fragile, and seemingly vulnerable white moonlight he had believed in was, from start to finish, nothing but an elaborately orchestrated deception, a cunning, malicious lie crafted with deep calculation and ruthless methods, and the harm he had inflicted upon Kimberly, it was all built upon these despicable lies. He was like a complete fool, manipulated by this mother and daughter pair, yet he thought he was guarding true love and responsibility. The immense shock and overwhelming regret. Like a tsunami, completely engulfed Felix. He staggered back a few steps, collapsing into a chair, his face as pale as paper, a fine, cold sweat beading on his forehead, a sharp, wrenching pain in his heart made it almost impossible for him to breathe. He immediately had someone invite Grace to his room. When he threw the irrefutable evidence in front of Grace, Grace initially tried to make excuses and sob her way out of it, but under the solid evidence and Felix's icy, knife-like gaze, her psychological defenses completely collapsed. She slumped to the floor, tears and mucus streaming down her face as she confessed to everything. Felix, I did it because I love you so much. I was jealous of Kimberly. I just wanted you to care for me more, to dislike her more. I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Please give me another chance. She cried until her makeup ran, her face contorted, looking utterly wretched. Felix looked down at her in this state, feeling not an ounce of pity, only a cold desolation and immense disgust. Uncontrollably, the image of Kimberly flashed through his mind. Even at her most wretched and painful moments, when misunderstood and hurt by him, she had never groveled like Grace did. She was always proud even with tears welling in her eyes. Her back remained straight. At this moment, he finally understood. What he missed, what had stirred his heart, what he truly couldn't let go of deep down, was never the hypocritical, lie-built illusion of Grace as his white moonlight, but it was that vibrant, real, clear about love and hate, burning like a flame, who had given him sincerity and warmth unreservedly even when he hurt her deeply. Kimberly, his so-called responsibility and lingering affection for Grace were nothing but a ridiculous self-deception, and his feelings for Kimberly had long seeped into his bones and become part of his life. Nurtured over 3 years of intimate companionship and accumulated in those seemingly ordinary yet precious moments, it was only deliberately ignored and forcibly suppressed by his own blindness, stubbornness, and that absurd obsession with an idealized past. This belated, blood-soaked realization brought not liberation, but overwhelming regret and agony. It nearly destroyed him completely. After the truth came to light, Felix handled the aftermath with swift and decisive action. He ordered Gavin to immediately return all illegally seized assets, and used his connections to submit evidence of Grace and her daughter's involvement in economic crimes to the relevant authorities. He and Grace completely broke up, severing all ties without the slightest hesitation or lingering attachment. After doing all this, what he felt was not relief, but a deeper emptiness and urgency. He had to see Kimberly immediately. He needed to beg for her forgiveness. Even if there was only a 1 in 10,000 chance, for the first time, he set aside all his pride and status, waiting like an ordinary man pleading for reconciliation outside the quiet villa where Kimberly lived. As his assistant had found out, the night was deep, the chill growing heavier. In his hand, he carried an exquisite paper bag containing the signature cake from that time-honored dessert shop she used to love the most, flown in by air. He remembered her sweet tooth, especially when she was in a bad mood. A single bite of something sweet would instantly smooth the furrow in her brow, like a cat being gently stroked. He had waited in the car the entire night. The ashtray was filled with cigarette butts, his eyes were bloodshot, and a stubble of dark beard had sprouted on his chin, leaving him looking haggard and disheveled. It wasn't until the sky began to lighten that a familiar sports car was seen approaching. Stopping at the villa's entrance, Bruno got out from the driver's seat, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door for Kimberly. Kimberly was dressed in simple home clothes, with a hint of weariness on her face, but her expression was relaxed, Bruno ruffled her hair and said something that made her smile. The atmosphere between them was warm and natural. This scene was like a thorn, piercing Felix's heart. He pushed the car door open and quickly walked over. Kimberly. His voice was unusually hoarse and dry from a sleepless night and tension. Let's talk. Kimberly turned at the sound of his voice. Seeing it was him, her brows immediately furrowed, and her eyes instantly filled with wariness and distance, as if looking at an unwelcome intruder. Mr. Felix, what are you doing here? We have nothing to talk about. Her indifference was like a basin of ice water, poured over Felix's heart. He took an urgent step forward, almost incoherently pulling out his phone, wanting to show the evidence. Kimberly, listen to me. What Grace and her family did, I've uncovered it all. I wronged you. The incident in the garden back then, the light fixture at the club, and your mother's car accident. None of them were accidents, it was them. I was stupid, I was blind, I was deceived by them. Kimberly raised her hand to stop him, her eyes as cold as Siberian permafrost, without a single ripple. So what? Felix was stunned. Kimberly looked at him, the corner of her mouth curling into a faint, deeply sarcastic smile. So the truth is out, and then what? Felix, your apologies, your remorse, they mean nothing to me. She spoke each word clearly and slowly, like a dull knife cutting through flesh. The damage has already been done. The humiliation of being pushed away like trash by you. The excruciating pain of having my wrist broken in the detention center. The despair of diving into the icy lake to retrieve my mother's keepsake. None of this can be erased by a flippant "I was wrong" or these so-called pieces of evidence. Her gaze fell on the exquisite paper bag in his hand, and she let out a scornful laugh. You still remember I like desserts from this place. How thoughtful of Mr. Felix to go through the trouble of having them airlifted from thousands of miles away. She raised her eyes, meeting his instantly pale face. Her tone casual yet lethally sharp. But I stopped having a sweet tooth a long time ago. It's too cloying, makes me sick. After saying that, she didn't even glance at him again, turned around, unlocked the door with her fingerprint, and walked inside, with a soft thud. The heavy solid wood door closed mercilessly in front of him, completely cutting off his line of sight and all his humble hopes. Felix stood frozen in place, like a stone statue abandoned in the cold wind. The paper bag holding the cake in his hand became unbearably heavy, as if it contained all his regrets and futile efforts. Inside the villa, Kimberly leaned against the cold door panel and slowly slid down to sit on the floor. Outside the window, a light drizzle began to fall, pattering softly. Saying it didn't hurt would be a lie. A faint, familiar ache still throbbed in her chest, but more than that. There was a sense of relief and exhaustion, as if everything had finally settled into place. Letting go wasn't as hard as I had imagined. She took out her phone, the screen lit up, showing a message from Bruno a few minutes ago. Are you alright? Kimberly looked at the message, her finger hovering over the screen for a moment before replying with 3 words. It's fine, it's all in the past. Yes, it's all in the past. Outside, the rain grew heavier and heavier. Felix still stood in the rain, utterly despondent. His expensive suit was soaked through, clinging tightly to his body and outlining his gaunt, wretched frame. Rainwater streamed down his sharply defined cheeks. It was impossible to tell whether it was rain or tears. He lifted his head to gaze at the window that would never open for him again. His eyes filled with a deathly, desolate grey. He knew that what he had lost might never be recovered, that icy rain seemed to drench Felix to the bone. Yet it failed to extinguish the sinister flame of resentment and regret burning in his heart. He returned home in a daze, 4 days on end. He shut himself in his room, refusing to see anyone or attend to any official duties. He simply stared at the grey sky outside the window, smoking one cigarette after another, the expensive Persian carpet beneath his feet littered with ashes. Kimberly's meaningless words, like the most vicious curse, echoed repeatedly in his ears. Her indifferent gaze, as if looking at a stranger, was like a blunt knife, cutting back and forth through his heart. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept that she had completely erased him from her life just like that. He couldn't accept that there was another man standing by her side. The disastrous failure of his first attempt to win her back didn't sober him up. Instead, it ignited a deeper obsession and desire for control within his very bones. What Felix wants, he always gets. Before, he was confused. He was deceived, but now he sees clearly. He has come to his senses, so she must return to him. An almost insane idea began to grow in his mind. He must create opportunities, make her have to face him, make her need him. He immediately dialed his chief assistant, his voice hoarse from staying up late, smoking, and drinking, yet carrying an undeniable command. Use all resources to find out Kimberly's most important upcoming business collaboration, no matter what it takes. I want to get involved, the highly efficient assistant quickly reported back. Kimberly team is in the final critical stage of negotiating a global endorsement contract with a century-old top luxury jewelry brand. This would be a qualitative leap for Kimberly's status in the international fashion world. Felix's eyes flashed with a fierce light. This is it. He immediately, in the name of the Francis Family Consortium, sent a cooperation proposal to the brand's headquarters, offering an extremely favorable, even to the point of being a loss leader, collaboration plan, with only one condition: to postpone the signing of the endorsement contract with Miss Kimberly. The Francis Family Consortium's strength and influence are beyond doubt, especially in the Asian market. Faced with such a huge temptation of benefits and potential pressure, the brand's senior management indeed hesitated. The originally scheduled transoceanic video signing meeting for the next day was temporarily postponed, with a request for further evaluation. When the news reached the Kimberly team, the atmosphere instantly turned heavy. The agent frowned deeply, looking at Kimberly with concern. Kimberly, dressed in comfortable loungewear, was practicing lines for an upcoming movie scene in front of the mirror. Upon hearing the news, she merely furrowed her brows slightly, then curled her lips into a faint, mocking smile. "Just his style," she said, putting down the script, her gaze cold and clear. "Does he think this will force me to back down?" Bruno was lazily lounging on the sofa playing games at the time. Hearing this, he put down his phone, walked over to her, wrapped his arm around her shoulder, and said in his usual flamboyant and confident tone, "Don't worry, I'm here." His Felix's reach isn't that long. The crucial video conference resumed. On the large screen in the brand headquarters conference room, the faces of Kimberly, Bruno's team, and an unexpected yet unsurprising Felix appeared one after another. Felix appeared on the screen, still dressed in a perfectly tailored high-end suit, sitting in his luxurious office that overlooked the entire CBD, with a background of floor-to-ceiling windows and a bustling cityscape. He tried to maintain his usual stern and authoritative demeanor, but the bloodshot eyes and the barely concealed exhaustion and restlessness between his brows betrayed his unsettled state of mind. As the meeting began, the brand's CEO cautiously mentioned the more strategic cooperation possibilities proposed by the Francis Family Consortium. His words tinged with hesitation. Felix spoke up at just the right moment, his voice coming through the microphone with a deliberately crafted, condescending calm. "The Francis family has great confidence in your brand's development and believes our collaboration will be mutually beneficial. As for the choice of spokesperson, I believe it requires more careful consideration to ensure their image aligns perfectly with the brand's core values." Though he didn't explicitly say it, his words were clearly aimed at Kimberly, implying that her qualifications or image might not be sufficient for such an important role. The atmosphere in the meeting instantly dropped to freezing point. Just then, Bruno's lazy voice cut in, laced with undisguised sarcasm. Well, Mr. Felix, long time no see. What, business back home isn't keeping you busy enough? Still have the leisure to meddle in matters concerning the European fashion circle's endorsements?" His figure appeared in the split screen next to Kimberly, dressed in casual wear, yet exuding an air of aristocratic elegance and nonchalance unique to those from old money families. He looked directly at the brand's CEO, his tone turning authoritative and serious. "Charlie, Kimberly's image, professionalism, and market appeal are evident to all. Our Derrick Family Foundation has always been one of your brand's most important art sponsors, and I personally greatly admire your brand's philosophy. I believe that choosing Kimberly as the global spokesperson is the most correct decision. As for certain irrelevant external interferences," he paused, his sharp gaze sweeping toward Felix on the other end of the screen, enunciating each word clearly. "The business world has its own rules. Don't bring those unsavory personal feelings and underhanded tactics into the open. It's unbecoming. Kimberly has gotten to where she is today through her own ability and hard work. She doesn't need anyone's charity, nor does she need to accept any threats." Bruno's words were like a resounding slap to Felix's face, and they also shook the brand representatives. The Derrick family's roots and influence in Europe were far beyond what the Francis family could match in a short period of time. Immediately after, Kimberly spoke up calmly. She switched to fluent French and, with composure, elaborated on her understanding of the brand's century-old history, craftsmanship, aesthetics, and core spirit, combining her own experiences and future development. She proposed a highly constructive vision for endorsement and promotion. Her speech was professional, confident, and full of charm, fully demonstrating the quality and vision expected of an international superstar, forming a sharp contrast with Felix's intervention based on personal desires. The brand executives exchanged appreciative glances, their previous hesitation completely swept away. In the end, the meeting concluded in a harmonious atmosphere. The brand CEO made the decision on the spot, and the Kimberly Global spokesperson contract was officially signed. Felix's screen was the first to go dark amidst the other party's polite yet distant farewell. He sat alone in the cold, empty office, listening to the busy tone in his ear, his face ashen, fists clenched, veins bulging on the back of his hands. His meticulously planned attack had not only failed completely but had instead become a backdrop to highlight Kimberly's capabilities and Bruno's strength. That night, on the top floor of the most exclusive private club in New York, Felix dismissed everyone, the crystal ashtray in front of him piled high with cigarette butts. He growled like a trapped beast at his trusted assistant, who stood with hands respectfully at his sides, not daring to make a sound. His voice was filled with frustration and an incomprehensible stubbornness. Why won't she even give me a chance to make it up to her? Bruno can give her, what can't I, Felix? Provide, wealth, resources, status. I can even give her more, 10 times, 100 times. What does she even want? The assistant, observing his nearly frenzied state, hesitated for a long moment before cautiously whispering a reminder. Mr. Felix, perhaps, MS. Kimberly never wanted these external things in the first place. Felix froze abruptly, as if struck by something, and stood rigidly in place. She didn't want these things. Then what did she want, for the first time? He began to truly and painstakingly ponder a question he had never deeply considered. Was it unreserved trust? Was it an unwavering choice? Was it the intention to put her first? Was it love? This realization, like a blinding flash of lightning, cleaved through his muddled mind, yet brought with it a deeper sense of bewilderment and panic. Just as he was trapped in the painful vortex of obsession and reflection, a sudden piece of news, like a thunderclap, shattered his world. Breaking news. Continuous heavy rainfall in the French Southern Alps has triggered massive flash floods and mudslides, cutting off communications and destroying roads in multiple towns and villages. The situation is critical, and the urgent intelligence that his assistant immediately followed up with made Felix's heart stop instantly. Kimberly was in that very area. She was invited to participate in a charity photoshoot for an international children's fund, right near the most severely affected town. Currently, all communication in the entire region is completely cut off, and their fate is unknown. At the time, Felix was chairing an important board meeting concerning the group's strategy for the next 10 years. When he heard the news his assistant whispered to him, he abruptly stood up from his seat at the head of the table, his face instantly turning ashen. He didn't even have time to offer an explanation. Under the astonished gazes of all the board members, he directly dropped the documents in his hand, turned, and rushed out of the conference room. Prepare the plane immediately, as fast as possible, to Nice. No, directly to the nearest airport where we can still land, he roared into the phone as he charged towards the elevator, his voice filled with an unprecedented panic and fear. Contact all local rescue agencies. Hire the best rescue team, any price. I'm going myself. Group strategies. Business empires. Everything became insignificant in the face of the news that she might be in danger. Only one thought consumed his mind. Find her. We must find her immediately. She cannot be in danger. Absolutely not. Hours later, Felix's private jet took an enormous risk, landing forcibly during a break in the storm at the nearest small airport still operational near the disaster area. The weather was extremely harsh, with thick dark clouds swirling overhead and wind and rain raging. Felix did not pause for a moment, switching to a prearranged helicopter and flying directly to the area where contact had been lost. The helicopter couldn't land directly and had to hover in a relatively safe zone. Felix ignoring the crew, he was the first to slide down the rope to the muddy ground. He had brought with him a highly paid, experienced professional mountain rescue team. Mr. Felix, the road ahead is too dangerous. The mudslide is still ongoing. You can't go in there. The rescue team leader anxiously stopped him, looking at the road ahead that had been destroyed by the flood, with landslides and broken trees everywhere. Enough nonsense. Lead the way. Felix's eyes were bloodshot, his voice hoarse. His expensive custom-made trench coat was already soaked through with rain and mud, clinging tightly to his body, making him look disheveled, but the determination and madness in his eyes were terrifying. He was almost moving on instinct. Driven by a near-desperate thought, trudging ahead with unsteady steps, sometimes sinking deep, sometimes shallow, the floodwaters reached up to their calves, icy and bone-chilling. Gravel continuously tumbled down the hillside. The fierce wind nearly knocked them off their feet, while dodging a small landslide. A falling rock suddenly struck the backpack carrying crucial rescue equipment behind him. Felix didn't hesitate, instinctively using his body to shove the backpack away. However, the edge of the rock sliced deeply into his left arm, revealing bone, and blood instantly gushed out, staining the murky floodwaters red. Mr. Felix, a team member exclaimed, rushing to bandage his wound. I'm fine, keep moving, Felix replied, his face pale, sweat and rain mixing on his forehead. He merely wrapped the wound haphazardly with a torn strip of cloth, gritted his teeth, and charged forward. The pain jolted his nerves, but it made him even more alert. He had to hurry, faster. After more than 10 hours of relentless, almost desperate searching, they finally found Kimberly in a dilapidated classroom of a primary school. The school, situated on slightly higher ground, had been surrounded by floodwaters, turning it into an isolated island. At that moment, Kimberly was together with several teachers, comforting dozens of frightened children. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale, and her clothes were stained with dirt, but her eyes were unusually calm. She was even softly telling stories to the children, trying to dispel their fear. When Felix stumbled into the classroom doorway, covered in mud and blood, looking as if he had crawled out of hell, everyone was stunned. Kimberly looked up, and the moment she saw him, her pupils contracted sharply, her face etched with incredulous shock. She seemed to have completely unexpected to see him here, in this manner. Our eyes met. Time seemed to freeze for a few seconds, Felix seeing her standing there completely unharmed. The heart that had been hanging in suspense for days and nights finally dropped with a heavy thud. An immense relief of having survived a disaster and an indescribable heartache instantly overwhelmed his reason. Ignoring the piercing pain in his arm and his disheveled state, he rushed forward in a few strides and, under the astonished gazes of everyone, tightly wrapped Kimberly in his arms. The force was so great it almost seemed as if he wanted to crush her. His body trembled uncontrollably, his voice hoarse and broken, with a heavy nasal tone, repeating over and over, "Thank goodness you're okay, thank goodness." It was a fear of loss and recovery, a near breakdown kind of dread. Kimberly was held tightly by him, clearly feeling his violent heartbeat and trembling body, and could even smell the strong scent of blood, mud, and an aura named fear emanating from him. Her stiff body relaxed for a moment, and a flicker of extremely complex emotions, concern, tenderness, crossed her eyes. But ultimately, reason prevailed. She pushed him away with force, but not roughly. Taking a step back and creating distance, she looked at his still bleeding arm and disheveled appearance. Her tone calm yet distantly polite. "Thank you, Mr. Felix, for risking danger to rescue me. I will remember this favor." After speaking, she no longer looked at him, turning instead to continue caring for the frightened children, as if he were merely a rescue worker carrying out a mission. Felix felt his arms empty, watching her resolute retreating figure. The relief in his heart receded like a tide, leaving only boundless desolation and coldness. He stood there like a puppet whose strings had been cut, frozen in place. Just then, the sound of a helicopter landing came from outside. Bruno arrived with another rescue team and supplies. He rushed into the classroom, immediately searching for Kimberly, and visibly relaxed upon seeing she was safe and sound. Then, his gaze fell upon the disheartened and severely injured Felix, his expression turning extremely complex. There was shock, scrutiny, and a hint of barely perceptible unease. Inside the makeshift shelter, medical staff were cleaning and bandaging Felix's wounds. The wound was deep and required stitches. Felix, however, seemed oblivious to the pain, his eyes continuously following the busy Kimberly not far away. He whispered to his assistant beside him, his voice carrying a faint, almost imperceptible trace of humble hope. "Did she, just now, when she saw my injury, show even the slightest bit of concern?" The assistant looked at his boss's pale and stubborn profile, then silently lowered his head. The answer was self-evident. The rescue operation in the disaster area was like a massive rock thrown into a lake, stirring up huge waves in everyone's hearts. Bruno witnessed with his own eyes how Felix risked his life to save Kimberly, which made him feel an unprecedented and tangible sense of crisis. He realized that Felix's feelings for Kimberly were far more obsessive and profound than he had imagined. It was definitely not just a matter of unwillingness to let go. Although Kimberly appeared calm on the surface, Bruno keenly sensed that the fleeting emotion in her eyes when she looked at Felix's wound was by no means completely devoid of feeling. He could wait no longer. He had to take their relationship to the next level, to stand by her side rightfully and protect her. On the night before the rescue work in the disaster area had stabilized and Kimberly's team was set to return home, Bruno did not arrange a grand scene, but instead chose a quiet moment, on a small hillside near the temporary shelter, where they could gaze at the starry sky. It was just the two of them. The night breeze was slightly cool, easing some of the fatigue and tension from the past few days. Bruno looked at Kimberly beside him, who was gazing up at the starry sky. Her profile appeared soft and serene under the moonlight. "Kimberly," he began, his voice uncharacteristically serious and gentle, stripped of its usual frivolity, "there's something I've been thinking about for a long time, and I feel it's time to tell you." Kimberly turned her head, looking at him with some confusion. Bruno took a deep breath, his gaze burning as he looked at her. I know you've probably always thought that when we were kids, I was always picking on you. Like an annoying tag-along. Actually, that's because I didn't know how else to get your attention. You were too dazzling, like a little sun, always surrounded by people. I could only use that clumsy way to make sure you'd at least remember that someone like me existed. He smiled self-deprecatingly and continued, later, when we grew up, I kept changing girlfriends, looking like a playboy, and because when I saw you with Felix, it hurt, and I didn't know what to do. I could only numb myself that way, and maybe I wanted you to see that Bruno, wasn't unwanted either. His tone carried a trace of bitterness. The moment you went abroad those 3 years, I followed you right away, not for any other reason, but just because I like you, Kimberly. I've liked you desperately since we were very young. These words, like a warm current, slowly flowed into Kimberly's heart. She stared at him blankly, looking at the undisguised affection and apprehension in his eyes. Over these 3 years, she remembered every bit of Bruno's kindness to her. He accompanied her through the loneliness of being in a foreign land for the first time, silently supported her when her career hit a rough patch, stayed by her side all night when she was sick, respected every decision she made, and never pressured her. His presence was warm and steadfast. Bruno held her hand, his palm warm and dry. Kimberly, I know there's still pain in your heart, and you haven't fully let go of the past. I'm in no hurry, I can wait. I just want to ask you, could you give me a chance? Let me protect you and treat you well, rightfully, as your boyfriend. His confession had no flowery words, no exaggerated romance, only the most sincere simplicity, backed by long-standing companionship. Kimberly's heart was deeply moved. She looked at Bruno, this man with whom she had grown up, sharing laughter and anger, and who had never left her side during her most difficult times. She had long felt a deep dependence and fondness for him. Perhaps it was time to try starting a new, healthy relationship. Perhaps this was the true way to leave the past behind. She remained silent for a long time, so long that Bruno's heart almost sank to the depths. Finally, she lifted her head, met his nervous gaze, and gave a slight nod. A faint yet genuine smile curved the corners of her lips. Okay. A single word, light as a feather, sent Bruno into an instant frenzy of joy. He excitedly pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if embracing a long-lost treasure. Although they didn't deliberately announce it, the news of their official relationship quickly spread among their close circle of friends. Everyone was happy for them after all. Bruno's 3 years of devotion had been plain for all to see. However, when this news reached Felix's ears, it became the final straw that broke the camel's back. At that time, he was in the hospital getting his arm wound treated. Due to searching in the rain and the wound becoming infected, he developed a high fever and had to be kept in the hospital for observation. When his assistant cautiously reported this news to him, Felix first froze, and then, it was as if he had heard the most absurd, the most unacceptable thing in the world. Impossible. He abruptly sat up from the hospital bed. Yanking the 4 needle from the back of his hand, blood instantly gushed out. His eyes were bloodshot, his demeanor like a madman. As he violently overturned the medical cart beside the bed, instruments and medicines clattered noisily as they crashed to the floor. How could she? How dare she? He roared, completely losing his usual calm and composed demeanor. Bruno, what right does he have? Ignoring the doctor's objections and his assistant's dissuasions, he forcibly checked out of the hospital and drove straight to Kimberly's villa. He even forgot that his arm was still wrapped in bandages, forgot that his fever hadn't subsided. His mind was consumed by a single, maddening thought. Go find her, ask for the truth. He wouldn't allow it. In the deep of the night, like a drunkard, he stumbled to the tightly shut wrought iron gate of the villa, pounding fiercely on the cold bars, his voice hoarse and desperate as he screamed Kimberly's name. The sound filled with anguish and despair. Kimberly, come out, tell me this isn't true. You can't do this to me. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Give me one more chance. Kimberly. His frantic actions quickly drew the attention of security guards. Several burly security guards attempted to drag him away, but he struggled like a trapped beast that had lost all reason, still desperately shouting her name, completely losing his dignity and composure in the humiliating scene. In the end, he was forcibly removed from the scene and shoved into a car. The car window slowly rose, cutting off his desperate screams and the cold night outside. On the second floor of the villa, the curtains trembled slightly. Kimberly stood behind the window, watching the absurd scene unfold downstairs. Watching the man who had once been so high and mighty being dragged away like a madman. Her face showed no expression, but deep in her eyes, there was a faint, complex ripple, so subtle that even she was unaware of it. Then, she tightened the curtains, shutting everything out. In the deep autumn, the fallen phoenix tree leaves covered the ground, spreading a golden poetic charm. Kimberly, wrapped in a soft cashmere shawl, sat by the sun-drenched floor-to-ceiling window, flipping through the newly delivered movie script. Bruno sat cross-legged on the carpet, handling official business on his laptop, occasionally looking up at her with a gentle gaze. The calm and cozy atmosphere was suddenly broken by a news alert that popped up on the tablet. Breaking: Gavin, chairman of the domestic well-known enterprise Colton Family Group, suspected of massive embezzlement and tax evasion, has been formally arrested by the police. Colton Family Group's stock price instantly crashes, declaring bankruptcy liquidation. In-depth reveal: behind the collapse of the Colton family, suspected to be the result of a precise attack by a mysterious capital giant. A series of bold headlines, shocking and eye-catching. Kimberly, her finger, scrolling across the screen, paused slightly as her gaze fell on the accompanying image in the news. Gavin, surrounded by reporters, his once confident and spirited face was now filled with panic and disarray. The gleaming handcuffs were glaringly locked around his wrists. There was not a ripple of emotion on her face, as if she were looking at a complete stranger who had nothing to do with her. Bruno put down his laptop, walked over to her side, and naturally wrapped his arm around her shoulder, asking softly, "Are you okay?" Kimberly shook her head, forcing a faint smile. "What could possibly be wrong with me?" Her tone was unnervingly calm. In the following days, news about the Colton family continued to escalate. Erin attempted to flee abroad with the last of the transferred assets, but was apprehended on the spot by police who had been waiting at the airport. As for Grace, under the multiple blows of losing her father's protection, family bankruptcy, and her mother's imprisonment, she completely broke down. She tried to find Felix, fantasizing that he might remember their past relationship and lend a helping hand, but she was coldly stopped by Felix's assistant at the group headquarters. Without even getting to see his face, the man she once regarded as her greatest support had dealt her the most fatal blow. Soon, tabloids broke the news that Grace had been sent to a psychiatric hospital in the suburbs due to mental instability. In the photos taken by paparazzi, she wore a patient gown, her eyes dull and vacant, a stark contrast to the gentle and captivating image she once had. Good and evil will eventually be rewarded, and the way of heaven revolves. Kimberly turned off the news page, stood up, and walked to the window, gazing into the distance. The afterglow of the sunset dyed the sky a magnificent orange-red, warm and serene. Bruno embraced her from behind, his chin gently resting on the top of her head, his voice low and firm. "It's all over, Kimberly." Kimberly leaning against his warm embrace, she softly murmured, "Yes, it's all in the past. Those entangled resentments, those unwilling grudges, with the collapse of the Colton family and the fate of Grace, have finally completely dissipated like smoke." Her heart was filled with tranquility, like an autumn-washed sky, clear and vast. She truly waved goodbye to that past filled with betrayal and hurt. The annual International Film Festival award ceremony has become the focus of global attention. On the red carpet, stars shone brightly, with camera flashes going off one after another. Kimberly wore a custom-made gown crafted from antique lace preserved by the Bruno family, with a train that swept the floor. Elegant as a swan, she held onto Bruno's arm and walked gracefully down the red carpet. 3 years of tempering have shed some of her youthful willfulness, adding the composure and elegance of a mature woman. Every smile and frown becomes a scene, instantly capturing countless flashes of cameras. Bruno, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, handsome and distinguished, looked at Kimberly with undisguised love and pride. They were the most watched couple of the night and strong contenders for the Best Actress award. New York, Francis Family Group's top-floor office. Felix didn't turn on the light, sitting alone in front of the huge floor-to-ceiling window. In the darkness, only the glow from the TV screen illuminated his gaunt and haggard profile. On the screen, the grand spectacle of the film festival was being broadcast live. When the camera zoomed in for a close-up of Kimberly and Bruno, his pupils suddenly contracted, and his heart felt as if it were being tightly gripped by an invisible hand, sending waves of suffocating pain. He watched her confident and composed smile on the red carpet, observed the intimate interactions between her and Bruno, and saw the overflowing affection in Bruno's gaze as he looked at her, captured by the camera, a complex mix of extreme pain, unwillingness, and a hint of pride that even he despised nearly tore him apart. He was in agony because the man by her side was not him. He was proud because she was so dazzling, the woman he had once possessed. He was unwilling. Why was it him who ultimately lost her? The results of the award ceremony were announced. Kimberly won the Best Actress crown with a profound art film that deeply interpreted the complexity of human nature. When her name was called, the entire audience stood up and applauded. Under the spotlight, she slowly walked onto the stage, took the heavy trophy from the award presenter, her eyes slightly red but her smile radiant. She delivered a brief acceptance speech, thanking the director and the crew. Finally, Her gaze fell upon Bruno in the audience, her voice gentle yet firm. "Lastly, I want to specially thank one person, my love, Bruno. Thank you for always being by my side, giving me support and strength. This trophy belongs to you as much as it does to me." The camera immediately focused on Bruno. He stood up and blew a kiss toward her on stage, his eyes glistening with emotion. The entire audience erupted in warm laughter and enthusiastic applause. Felix abruptly turned off the TV. In the darkness, he gasped for breath, like a dying fish. No, he couldn't just stand by and watch her walk into someone else's arms. He had to do something. The post-award celebration banquet was held at the official film festival hotel. It wasn't until late at night that Kimberly and Bruno, surrounded by their assistants and bodyguards, made their way to the underground parking lot with a hint of fatigue. Just as they reached their car, a dark figure stumbled out from behind a pillar, blocking their path. "It's Felix." He looked even worse than he did on television. His suit was crumpled, his tie askew, his eyes bloodshot with alarming red veins, and he reeked strongly of alcohol, exuding an aura of desperate, near-breaking despair. He stared fixedly at Kimberly, his voice hoarse like a broken bellows. "Kimberly, congratulations." He took a step forward, almost pleading. "Let's talk, just 5 minutes. No, 3 minutes is enough. Give me one more chance, one last chance. I'm begging you. Without you, I really can't go on living." Bruno immediately shielded Kimberly behind him, his gaze icy as he looked at Felix, his tone carrying a warning. "Felix, look at what you've become. Snap out of it. Kimberly is with me now, and she's happy. Please don't disturb her life anymore." "Happy?" Felix seemed provoked by the word, jerking his head up, his eyes wild as he stared at Bruno. "What makes you think you can make her happy? What do you even know about her? Do you know she's afraid of the cold in winter and likes to steal the blankets when she sleeps? Do you know she can't handle spicy food but loves eating it anyway, always needing ice water to soothe the burn? Do you know she—" "Enough." Kimberly cut him off, stepping out from behind Bruno, her gaze calm as she looked at Felix. There was no hatred or resentment in her eyes, only deep exhaustion and a hint of pity. "Felix, let's not bring up the past anymore. What we had ended long ago. It's not over. How could it be over?" Felix excitedly tried to grab her arm, but was blocked by Bruno. While the three were arguing, none of them noticed that at the entrance of the parking lot, a black car, as if the driver was drunk or the vehicle had lost control, suddenly accelerated sharply, like a runaway wild horse. It swerved erratically and charged fiercely toward their direction. "Watch out!" Bruno was the first to react, shouting loudly as he instinctively moved to shield Kimberly completely in his arms. However, someone was faster than him, almost as if driven by an instinct etched deep into his soul. Before anyone could react, Felix used every ounce of his strength and violently shoved Kimberly, who was standing on the outermost edge, away with all his might. The force was so great that Kimberly let out a sharp cry as she stumbled and fell into Bruno's arms, but he himself, due to the recoil, was left completely exposed in front of the out-of-control vehicle. Boom! A dull, terrifying crash echoed through the empty parking lot. Felix's body was like a kite with its string cut, sent flying high into the air by the impact before crashing down heavily onto the cold cement several meters away. Blood instantly spread out from beneath him, staining a large patch of the ground red. Time seemed to stand still at that moment. Kimberly, held tightly by Bruno, stared in stunned silence at the horrific scene before her, her heart feeling as if it had stopped beating instantly. She could even see clearly the look in Felix's eyes as he was sent flying, the way he looked at her. No fear, no regret, only a complex emotion akin to relief, as if saying, "Look, this time, I saved you first, Felix." Bruno was the first to react, tightly shielding the trembling Kimberly while shouting at the approaching bodyguards and hotel security, "Call an ambulance. Hurry." The scene was in chaos. Kimberly stared at the motionless figure lying in a pool of blood, her face as pale as paper, her body trembling uncontrollably, even though she no longer loved him. Even though there was so much resentment, a vibrant life, one that had saved her, might be fading away before her eyes. The impact made it impossible for her to remain completely calm. Bruno felt her trembling and held her tighter in his arms. His warm hand stroked her back as he spoke in a deep, firm voice. "Don't be afraid, Kimberly, it's all right. The ambulance will be here soon, it's going to be okay." His voice was like a solid barrier, giving her a sliver of support. The lights in the emergency room stayed on all night. Kimberly and Bruno waited on the bench in the hallway outside the door. Bruno held her hand the entire time, silently giving her strength. Kimberly leaned back against the chair, eyes closed, her long eyelashes trembling slightly, revealing the turmoil within her. At daybreak, the door to the emergency room finally opened. The exhausted doctor came out and informed them that Felix had sustained extremely severe injuries. with multiple fractures and internal bleeding. However, after intense efforts, he was temporarily out of critical condition and had been transferred to the ICU for observation. He was not yet out of the danger period and required close monitoring. Kimberly let out a sigh of relief, but her heart remained heavy. After keeping vigil outside the ICU for another day and night, Felix's vital signs gradually stabilized, and he was transferred to a general ward. Though he remained extremely weak, Bruno accompanied Kimberly inside to see him. The room was filled with the smell of disinfectant. Felix lay on the stark white hospital bed, tubes running into his body, his face so pale it was almost translucent, his form gaunt and emaciated. Only his deep-set eyes held a faint glimmer of light the moment he saw her enter, like a drowning man clutching at his last piece of driftwood. His lips moved, making an extremely faint sound. "Kimberly." Bruno patted Kimberly's shoulder, indicating that he would wait for her outside, then thoughtfully closed the door. Leaving them alone, Kimberly walked to the bedside, sat down in the chair, and looked at him calmly. "The doctor said you're temporarily fine," she began, her tone flat. Felix gazed greedily at her face, as if trying to carve her image deep into his soul. He struggled to lift the hand that wasn't receiving four fluids, wanting to touch her, but when he saw the clear distance in her eyes, his hand dropped powerlessly. "I'm sorry." His voice was hoarse, filled with endless regret. "Kimberly, I'm sorry. I know, no matter how many times I say sorry, it can never make up for the hurt I've caused you." He began to speak intermittently, as if wanting to pour out all the words that had been suppressed in his heart for too long. From being initially deceived by Grace, to later realizing his feelings but refusing to admit them due to pride and stubbornness, to the pain and regret after losing her, he apologized over and over again, professed his love repeatedly, and even let go of all his dignity and pride, pleading in a humble and lowly manner. "Kimberly, I know, I'm not worthy of you. I know I deserve to die 1,000 deaths. But, please, give me one more chance, just one. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you, atoning for my sins. Without you, my life is no different from death." As he spoke, tears slid from the corners of his eyes, mingling with the white hairs at his temples. Kimberly listened quietly without interrupting him. Only when he grew tired from speaking, his voice gradually fading until only heavy panting and hopeful gazes remained, did she slowly begin to speak. Her voice was very soft, yet exceptionally clear, each word like the most precise scalpel, dissecting all the history between them. "Felix, thank you for saving me this time. I will remember this life-saving favor." Felix, there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes, but Kimberly's next words completely extinguished that glimmer of hope. "But love isn't gratitude, and it's certainly not guilt. Between us, it's been over for a long time. When you broke my wrist without hesitation for Grace. When you used your connections to send me to the detention center, making me suffer, every single time you chose to believe her and hurt me without a second thought, it was over between us. Completely. The cracks run too deep to mend. My heart, it died long ago." She watched the light in his eyes gradually fade, replaced by utter desolation, and continued calmly, "Felix, let's just end it here." With that, she stood up, not sparing him another glance, turned, and walked toward the hospital room door. "Kimberly." Felix used his last ounce of strength to utter a faint call, carrying a tone of desperate sobbing. Kimberly's footsteps paused at the doorway, but she did not turn around. She reached out and pulled open the door. Outside the door, Bruno stood there, gazing at her with gentle yet resolute eyes. Kimberly walked to his side. Bruno naturally took her hand and held it tightly. Side by side, the two left the hospital room without looking back. Disappearing at the end of the corridor, Felix lay on the hospital bed, staring at the empty doorway, at her resolute retreating figure, until tears finally surged forth, streaming down from the corners of his eyes and soaking the pillow. He knew, this time, he had truly lost her forever, lost that red rose, which had once illuminated his bleak life like a flame, yet was pushed away and extinguished by his own hands. Time flies, and another year of spring and autumn has passed. This year, Kimberly's career reached new heights. She starred in an epic film directed by an internationally renowned top-tier director, portraying a woman who held on to her faith and love amidst the flames of war. Her performance was exquisite and deeply moving, at the ceremony hailed as the highest honor in the film industry. When the name of the Best Actress, Kimberly, was announced, the entire venue erupted in excitement. Kimberly, dressed in a pale gold gown symbolizing hope and rebirth, calmly rose to her feet, shared a tight embrace with the tearfully emotional Bruno beside her, and then walked with graceful steps toward the world-renowned stage. Under the spotlight, she held the trophy representing the highest honor in the film industry, her smile gentle yet powerful. She delivered her acceptance speech in fluent English, thanking the film crew, family, and friends Finally, her gaze turned tenderly toward the man in the audience who had been watching her all along. Finally, I would like to dedicate this honor to my fiancé, Bruno. It is you who made me believe that love could be so beautiful, and gave me the courage to become a better version of myself. Mr. Fu, I look forward to your guidance for the rest of my life. The camera immediately cut to Bruno for a close-up. He had already stood up, tears of pride and happiness glistening in his eyes, making an I love you gesture to her on the stage. The entire venue erupted in prolonged applause and cheers of blessing. The two gazed at each other across the distance, and the image of theirs was broadcast live to every corner of the world, overflowing with happiness. A week later, a low-key yet warm wedding was held at a private estate. Only the closest family and friends were invited. Sunshine, lawn, flowers, white veil. Kimberly, wearing a simple yet elegant wedding dress personally created by her designer friend, walked along the petal-strewn path on Bruno's arm, her face radiant with a genuine, blissful smile. Bruno looked at her, the love in his eyes so intense it seemed to melt. Their wedding invitations were also sent to some old acquaintances. Francis Family Group's top-floor office. Felix stood before the massive floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the city below that remained as bustling as ever. He had grown thinner compared to a year ago, his demeanor more settled, with an inescapable loneliness lingering between his brows. On the desk lay a delicate wedding invitation, its gilded letters stinging his eyes. He did not attend the wedding that day. The afterglow of the sunset dyed the room a warm orange, and the air still seemed to carry a faint, elusive trace of her fragrance. He stood quietly, like a silent statue. His phone screen suddenly lit up. It was a text message from an unknown number. There are no words, only a photograph. In the photo, Kimberly is wearing a pure white wedding dress, standing in the brilliant sunlight. Her veil is gently lifted by the breeze as she smiles at the camera with unparalleled happiness and serenity. The shadows of the past are gone from her eyes, replaced only by anticipation and contentment for the future. A few seconds later, another message came in. With just one sentence, Felix, I forgive you. I have also let myself go. Take care. Felix stared intently at the photo and those words, feeling as if his heart had been struck hard by something. After the sharp pain, a strange sense of relief unexpectedly emerged. His trembling hand caressed her happy smiling face on the screen. Tears finally surged uncontrollably, falling in large drops onto the phone screen, blurring that dazzlingly bright smile. He was crying and laughing like a madman. In the end, he pressed the phone tightly against his burning chest, as if he could still feel a trace of her lingering warmth. He knew he had lost his red rose forever, that most willful and radiant rose, which had once bloomed so wildly in his life, only to be broken by his own hands. But perhaps this was his best ending, using a lifetime of loneliness and longing to atone for a sin that could never be repaid. And Kimberly, this red rose that had weathered storms and been trampled into the mud, finally broke free from all shackles. In the soil that truly belonged to her, filled with love and sunlight, she bloomed fiercely in the wind, radiating her own most brilliant and captivating light, through the passage of time and across the mountains and rivers. From here on, each found their own peace. The end.